Hello to whoever is out there, if anyone is out there. Welcome to Social Science Sunday, actual history lessons given by an actual history teacher. For anyone who didn't see the first and only other time I've streamed last Sunday, hi, I'm an actual California history teacher. I am credentialed, which means that I have basically been given an OK stamp by the state of California to teach history specifically at a high school level. So what that translates as is California says I'm good to teach world history, U.S. history, American government, and for some reason that I really don't understand, econ, because econ is under the history umbrella. Of those four subjects, I have taught everything but econ. I have also taught drama and a course that was kind of like a remedial English course kind of thing. Excuse me. I will likely be coughing a whole heck of a lot during this stream. Hello, it's a 9. Nice to see you again. I'll likely be coughing a whole heck of a lot during the stream because I'm in California, and not only is most of California on fire, but specifically the place where I live in, there's a fire not very far. I actually sort of unknowingly drove by it when it was sort of first starting out, but there's a fairly big it's either the river or the canyon fire. They're both near me. I'm down kind of, I'm near Salinas, which is a kind of, think of LA's here, San Francisco's here, Salinas is kind of right about here. It's most famous for being where John Steinbeck lived. So, how this works, I have compiled a list of actual lessons that I have taught before. I have modified them slightly. Oftentimes I'm combining multiple lessons. Since if I was actually teaching this, I'd have like reading activities and, various things that don't translate well to a Twitch space. So right now, as I still figure out exactly what I'm doing, in a moment, I'll drop the link to this poll in chat. What this is all of these are lessons that I have created, and it's up to you guys to help us decide what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go over them quickly, and then I'll drop the link. So, starting at the bottom, Berlin Wall, with a focus on the Berlin Wall is not a good metaphor for the wall, Trump's wall. World War I propaganda, we'll look at propaganda together, and you'll get the history teacher insight. Main causes of World War I is a little, I can't remember the specific, it's like YMCA, it stands for something. So it's what caused World War I. Images of World War I, again, looking at a bunch of propaganda, actual photos, etc., and talking about what it tells us about the war. This is a fairly big one. It's sort of an overview of the Holocaust. It talks about historical anti-Semitism and then gives you kind of a grounding for the Holocaust. It's what I use to start off my Holocaust unit when I teach it. This one's a little bit more fun, that it's a simulation of how would you fare if you went through the Great Depression. Again, a pretty big one, civil rights movement overview. This last one is not so much a lesson, it's more just kind of like, here's how you become a California history teacher, the steps involved, at least the way that I did it. It would also be looking at something called the California History Standards, which is essentially the guideline for how you teach history in California. So I'm dropping that link in the poll, in the text. I can't talk today at all, and trying to bop over. So right now is the point where you decide what we go over. Yeah, so link in the thing below. Bop over, choose which one you want to do. In case of tie, I basically function as the tiebreaker. Or in some circumstances, we can do both. That's what we did last time. This is also the point where, as I stall for people to vote, you can ask random questions. If you're over here from the post that I put on the Silicet page. Yeah, and the Depression one is a little more like, yeah, most people live in the Great Depression. It's just, how well do you fare? And it's a little kind of really hokey. I think I originally put it together with, it was created from a lesson that I got from another teacher, and I modified slightly. And a lot of it was basically, I knew that I was going to get observed on that day, and I knew what the guy wanted, so I tailored a lot of stuff directly to him. Smoke in the air. Let's see, I can't remember if I have to refresh this or not to get a... Ooh, big vote for the Holocaust just popped in. So again, if you don't vote, you don't get to decide. This is very much like real life. If you don't vote and you're like, man, I wanted us to do civil rights movement, you didn't vote. Yeah, I meant to put in another option, which was a sort of does my vote actually count? But I couldn't find my stuff from when I taught American government, which had been a while ago. So give it a little longer. Again, feel free to ask questions in the chat, even if they're not off topic. The worst I'll do is just not answer one. And actually, I'm going to get some water so that I'm not coughing. And you get to see me. Look, I actually have legs. Huzzah. Where the heck is my phone? Yeah, so some of the Great Depression simulation is it's not what most people would consider a simulation. A lot of words have different connotations when you're talking about teaching. So simulation, when we're talking about teaching, is a really sort of simplistic simulation. I do try to pull in a bunch of sort of more game events. The problem is most of them wouldn't translate really well to doing it via Twitch. They're sort of, you need to have a little bit more interaction, / you would need more people. So if I ever got to the point where I actually had, at least 15 or so people, then I'd be able to do some of those simulation games. For example, there's one where it's imperialism taking over Africa, stuff like that. So I'm going to give it a little bit more, see if anyone else wishes to vote. But right now, looks like we're most likely going to be learning about the Holocaust, unless there's a sudden sweep of people going, you know what, I'm not going to talk in chat, but I'll do it if I, which is fun. I do enjoy the chat talks because it sort of inspires me to be a little bit less stuffy history teacher and a little bit more making jokes about whether Nicholas, the Tsar of Russia, is a top or a bottom, which we did last time. Have I taught about apartheid? Let me actually, there we go, allow that comment. Yes, I have taught about apartheid. I cannot say that word for some reason today. Unfortunately, some of this is a little bit I might just do a little bit of this at some point anyway. The way that the history standards work, you teach history chronologically. I mean, that's a no duh. But specifically, apartheid would be world history. World history in California is usually what you take your sophomore year of high school, so the second year of high school. Some schools do it freshman year. But in any case, in world history in high school, you start kind of around Columbus-ish. You don't get into Columbus too much, but you kind of start around Columbus. So by the time that you get to apartheid, you're the end of the year. So the 2 times that I've taught world history, because I am a fairly new teacher, at one point I was a new teacher who didn't know how to schedule stuff very well, so it was kind of covered very quickly. The other time it was this year when I'm teaching during COVID and we're teaching distance learning, and because of it took our school district a little bit to go, oh, this isn't going to go away. So we actually lost 2 weeks or so of instruction because they basically went to spring break early. But right now, I'm going to call that as saying we are going to be talking about the Holocaust. So one moment as I hit that button, as I open that up and change, the title of the stream and all that good stuff. and see if my settings from the last go-round survived the few changes I made because I was bored this morning. Yeah, a lot of the interesting stuff, since I am teaching in a public school, is even though kind of the general consensus has now shifted to Columbus was a dick, you don't get that still. And you still get, like, you'll get a lot of kids that still, like, all they know about Columbus is kind of the, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So I have a lot of stuff that is kind of like, no, he was horrible. Most people in history have been horrible. That's actually one of the reasons why I decided to teach high school as opposed to like middle school. The way that California does its credential stuff, there's two kinds of credential. There's a multiple subject and a single subject. Multiple subject is elementary. So if you're going to teach kindergarten through, depending on the school district, 7th or 8th grade, or not, it's 6th or 7th grade, you're going to be doing everything. And then secondary credential is a specific topic. So I have a history credential. I could not teach an elementary school. I would not want to teach an elementary school. But with my single subject credential, I can teach middle school or high school. And I prefer to teach high school because you get to be a little bit more real with the kids as opposed to, anything else. Yeah, Lovecraft is the good example of, I love Lovecraft's books. I love Cthulhu. I love all of, I've got a big, multi-volume collection of Lovecraft. And I love all of his stuff, but he's just so horrible. Like, if you don't realize how horrible he is, Google name of Lovecraft's cat. I think will get you what you need for that. Okay. There we go. Is everything working? Yeah, Lovecraft is really interesting. I had one class that I took in college, which was, so in college I majored in history and I minored in religion because I thought it was interesting. I've been, oh, hi Lemming. Nice to see you. Yeah, Gandhi also is a dick. I include a whole lot of that when I teach about Gandhi as well, which is very important because while a lot of textbooks have sort of gotten with the times of saying that Columbus was horrible, fewer textbooks have gotten with the times of saying, yeah, Gandhi was not a good guy. Was not perfect. No one's freaking perfect. Yeah. So I got into religion because they do intertwine a lot. Also because in college I kind of ended up focusing on end of World War I to breakup of the Soviet Union. So understandably, there's a lot of, World War II especially, there's a lot of religious connections and stuff like that. Also, I just thought it was interesting. I have been an atheist, or at least questioning my religion ever since I could sort of knew what religion was, ever since I reached that moment as a kid where you go, what the heck is this church that I'm going to every Sunday? And I actually am the granddaughter of a Episcopal minister. So my grandfather was an Episcopal minister. Understandably, my father's family was all very much raised in that. My mother, less so. My grandfather on her side was in the Marine Corps, I believe, but still, sort of culturally religious. So, sort of went to that. Oh, yeah, Mother Teresa. Horrible, horrible person. Oh, God, Mother Teresa. So, as you can see from the change of that, and I just got to hit. I'm still figuring out how Streamlabs work. I'm not a natural of it. It also doesn't help that I only have one monitor I'm running this off of. So, our lesson for today, we are going to be learning about the Holocaust. Again, this is sort of a combination of several lessons that I usually put at the beginning of my Holocaust unit. How I teach the Holocaust, how I have taught the Holocaust. I teach World War I, but obviously. Then I teach, in between the wars, buildup of Hitler, buildup of the USSR, buildup of Japan. And I teach World War II from the war perspective. So I'll have sort of two units. I'll have my World War II unit and my Holocaust unit. So I sort of teach the war, and then I go back and I teach the Holocaust because I sort of think it's deserving of its own unit. And unfortunately, a lot of times the textbooks will have the Holocaust be one subchapter in the World War II section. and won't mention anything other than like the most basic. So as we go through this, kind of remember this is intended a little bit, it's mostly intended for high school students. Most of the modifications I'm doing are in what I'm actually saying, that I can say stuff like, I don't like Trump. When I actually teach, I have to, sort of obscure that a little bit. So, again, apologize for coughing. I am near the California wildfires. It smells like I'm at like a campfire like all the time. As I spilled water on myself. Okay, so we're going to start off with talking about anti-Semitism. And yes, for anyone wondering, I have a lot of students that don't know what the heck that word means. So a lot of this, anytime you're asking yourself, why is she telling us this? We already know it. High school students. Most recently, I taught this to freshmen, and they just did not know anything. Like, I had actually one kid, what was it? I'm forgetting the specific horrible belief he had. It wasn't the most horrible belief I've ever heard, but it was like very, casually bringing up something anti-Semitic. So anti-Semitism, you'll see it with both the hyphen and without the hyphen, is hatred of Jews / Judaism. Unfortunately, it is kind of a tale as old as time. The earliest anti-Semitic writing that survives for us to have dates back to 400 BCE. Oh, nice to see you, Lieutenant Lemming. Have a good sleep. Thank you for popping in. So BCE is before Common Era. It is the less religious way of doing time since BC, before Christ. So the fact that we have that means that most likely there was more of it. There was, stuff dating back even previous. Unfortunately, it's been very common. A lot of it is Jews are to blame for Jesus' death. That is a very common root of anti-Semitism, which we'll get into why that is. So some examples from sort of early history. In the Roman Empire, Jews were not allowed to own Christians as slaves. There was no, Christians could own Jewish slaves, but Jews could not own Christian slaves. Jews were forbidden from converting Christians to Judaism. Again, it didn't go the other way. Christians could convert Jews all they wanted. Jews were not allowed, and oh yay, we have the first of many typos. There's always typos that I forget to fix, because I am not very good at spell check. If spell check doesn't catch it, I usually won't. Jews were barred from government jobs, that should be, not jaws. I have no idea how that typo became that. They're also forbidden from entering the army and the legal profession, so the Roman equivalent of lawyers. This one specifically is very important because in Roman society, a lot of your ability for upward movement was based upon the fact that you had served in the army. A lot of like higher level jobs, higher level positions in the government required you have completed army service. It's also important because often the ability to become a Roman citizen was tied with army service. Similar to, there's this, I think Trump's, messed with it a whole bunch, but I believe currently in the U.S. Army there's a similar thing where if you serve a certain amount, you get citizenship, or you're supposed to at least. There were also a lot of laws in Rome that regulated when Jews could have their religious services, so they're just not allowed to do it all the time. And very frequently, Jewish synagogues would be destroyed. This is also the point where when I'm teaching high schoolers, I have to go, a synagogue is like a Jewish church. So there's side lady banking. Banking is a little bit later that actually comes in. The sort of rise of Jewish families being involved in banking is more Middle Ages, which we'll get to. So specifically, there's many reasons why people have hated Jews, why anti-Semitism has been a thing. One of the most common reasons is because of the New Testament of the damn Bible. So, huzzah, let's look at the Bible. And this is always interesting whenever I teach about it, because you'll have a wide variety of kids in class. You'll have some kids that are super freaking sheltered. I have had one or two kids before where I had one kid where their mom or dad actually sent a letter in at the beginning of the year asking that if we talked about Muslims, they'd be excused from class. I can't remember how. That was like my first year teaching, and that was like when I was doing student teaching, so I just sort of handed that over. My master teacher was like, what the heck do I do with this? So again, public school is everyone's there. You're going to get a whole lot of interesting ideas from kids. So I usually go over the story as told by the Brick Bible, because it's a great little illustration. So in Matthew 27:11, This is the build up to Jesus being crucified. Jesus is brought before the governor. Yeah, the Bible does have an entire chat. The Song of Solomon, is it, or something? One of the songs things that I've seen the various sexy readings of it, which are freaking hilarious. So Jesus has been arrested. This is eventually going to lead to Jesus being crucified. He's brought before the governor. And it just so happens that this is the time of the year where the governor had a tradition of he would go before the crowd and offer two different prisoners and go, hey, I'm going to pardon one of these two. Which one should I pardon? So he decides to offer up Jesus as one of those prisoners, and for the other prisoner, he chooses a gentleman named Barabbas. Barabbas is in prison for committing murder. There are some accounts, I think, which translated actually as he was like a rapist, so not a good guy, and Jesus. And he goes before the crowd and he says, who do you want me to release? Do you want me to release Barabbas, or do you want me to release Jesus, the King of the Jews? And Jesus comes out. He's wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe, and the entire crowd goes, no, get away, be gone with him. Give us Barabbas. We don't want Jesus. We want to save Barabbas. So, Pontius Pilate is like, are you sure? If you want Barabbas, what should I do with Christ? And they say, let him be crucified. And he's like, okay, you guys want this? I'm innocent of this man's blood. I wash my hands of it. So, what? And again, high schoolers, I have to explain. Wash your hands is like saying, I'm not dealing with this. It's not on me. It's on you. And they're all like, yeah, we're fine with that. So the crowd is going, we're fine with you blaming us for Jesus' death. Now, this is in Jerusalem. So the crowd is Jewish. Again, yeah, people, it's Jewish. So from the Bible, you get a Christian belief that the Jews are responsible for the death of Christ. So very often, even up to this day, Christians believe that Jews killed Jesus Christ, that he's to blame, even though, this is putting it very simply, but in the grand scheme of things, Jesus dying is a good thing, washed away our sins and all that jazz. So this is a classic example of scapegoating. Due to the biblical gospels, all Jews were held guilty for Jesus' death, despite the fact that the Bible is not historically accurate. Even if it was, the Romans were the ones who did the killing, and they were ultimately responsible for his death. So ever since, Jews have been a scapegoat. They've been blamed for it unjustly, and there's been ongoing targeting by Christian religious leaders and the general public. What's really interesting to me when I teach this to actual high schoolers is the shock this will get from a few kids. Which is understandable, and when I do teach it to high schoolers, I sort of phrase it a little bit more gently, and I'll usually have like, hey, if you want to talk to me after class about this, we'll talk about it gently. But it is a little bit interesting I'm not like super openly atheist as a teacher, but I am, just kind of, I'd put it like casually, like, yeah, I don't really believe it. And I'll bring up stuff like that. I've had a few interesting sort of, not debates, but I would actually call them conversations. And yes, Jesus was making some pretty heretical claims from the Jewish point of view. There's definitely a whole lot of really good people on YouTube who talk about this more than me, since despite the fact I minored in religion, I didn't, focus too much on it, and most of my focus ended up being kind of more cultural. Like, I took a really cool class in college that was essentially religion in sci-fi, like how religion is portrayed in sci-fi. So we watched a bunch of Star Trek episodes. We talked about Star Wars. I actually wrote like a term paper for that class about how Doctor Who had the Doctor as a Jesus character. I'm going to turn on my fan, so apologies if the sound is horrible, but I can't open a window because, again, smoke in the air. So, this continues to modern times. Again, here we have the absolutely horrible Westboro Baptist Church. Yes, Jana and Jake, yeah. Hannah and Jake, definitely watch Hannah and Jake. I'm pretty sure most people are here because of Hannah, because I hang out in Hannah's chat, but Definitely watch Hannah and Jake. I need to rewatch their Bible study series because I was watching it for a while and then I stopped because I think YouTube stopped recommending it for me for whatever reason. So unfortunately, hatred of Jews is still common. You will have students that don't believe this. You will have students that are like, what do you mean? Like, there's still these horrible groups out there that, are believing this, are, going out there and saying it. So move forward a bit to the Middle Ages. Anti-Semitism is still, going strong in the Middle Ages. Some various things that occurred. One thing is in some areas at certain times, Jewish men had to wear hats to identify themselves as Jewish. That's this kind of, looks like a bell to me, like this kind of hat over here. There are also, in various times, Jews are being required to wear a mark on their clothing. So again, this is stuff that even the sort of most history blind students will know about, the star during the Holocaust. So that's sort of building up a little bit of, precedent for it. This is also where you get another big historical reason why people don't like Jewish people. At this point, the Catholic Church was super in control of people's lives. It's really hard with our modern day sensibility to understand how much in control the church was. It's a little bit easier for people who have been in more cult-like groups or been in super religious families, but kind of in general, it's hard to understand the impact that the church had. At the time, the Catholic Church did not think it was Christian for people to charge interest when they lent money. So interest very simply being, I lend you $100, you have to pay me that back plus $5 for me lending you the money. Usually it's a percentage. You usually don't want a high amount of interest. For example, my mother, when I had to get my first car, my mother helped me out and she lent me some money interest-free so that my original car loan would be much lower because the interest is what'll kill you. And I'll usually compare it to if there's a payday loan, like check into cash or one of those in town, I'll look up how much their interest charges and be like, here's what you're going to be paying. Now, the problem with this is that if you're lending money, the only way you can make money by lending money is to charge interest. So if you charge interest, you get something back for your troubles. If you don't charge interest, then you don't get anything back, and someone can just run away with your money. So this was all Christians were told that if they charged interest, they were going to go to hell, pretty much. So Jews didn't have this restriction. So they became money lenders and also tax collectors because there was sort of a similar stigma with tax collecting, despite the fact that everyone wants taxes because that's how you get stuff done. So this led to a lot of stereotypes. People would say, oh, they're into money lending because they're greedy, they only love money, they don't love anything else. And a whole lot of cultural stuff, if you look into it, is super freaking anti-Semitic. One example being large noses. Large noses in illustration is an anti-Semitic caricature. So you've got anti-Semitism on the rise, again, continuing throughout Europe, being carried on, and you have the beginning of what were called ghettos. Ghetto is a part in a city where members of a minority group live, either by law or as a result of social, legal, economic pressure. So you could have someone saying the Jews can only live in this area of the city, or you could have, well, all the Jews are living there, and other landlords won't rent to Jews, and they'll look at you strange if you're not living there. Originally, the word ghetto was used almost exclusively to refer to an area where Jewish individuals lived. Now it's since gotten other meanings. So I think most commonly now when we talk about ghettos, we talk about, in America at least, areas with high African American or Latino populations. But originally, it meant Jews. It indicated that was where Jewish people were living. They were very common in Central and Eastern Europe, and they were very frequently walled in. So here we have some illustrations on ancient maps that you can see this area that's been put in this sort of lighter yellow was the ghetto. I'm forgetting what town this is a map of. And you can see if you look along the edge that there's kind of, big gates and walls. Some of this is for a good reason. The walls are to protect Jewish individuals from mobs, that if they see a mob coming, they can close the gates, like a traditional castle, offers protection. But some of it is to keep Jews in during Christian Holy Weeks. There was sort of a lot of fear in medieval Europe that Jews could sort of invalidate religious rituals and stuff like that, that the presence of a Jewish individual was a bad thing. As I keep coughing my lungs out. But another big reason is to prevent the intermingling of Jews and Christians. Long before there was the sort of traditional racist view is like, we have to protect the white woman. That goes back even when we're not talking about people of African descent. That goes back to traditionally Jews were seen as not white. So, and in addition to that, they're greedy for money. There was also this sort of belief that they were greedy for white people. Again, horrible. Many, many horrible things. As I sip my water. So this was very much a part of life in the Middle Ages. That there'd be exceptions. You'd have places where Jews lived outside the ghetto and maybe there wasn't this thing. But sort of the default was, in larger cities, there's a ghetto, this is where the Jews live, and all the Christians around them don't trust them. Yeah, especially Christian women. Again, the racist view of we have to protect white women, which you'll see, like, even today at neo-Nazis. You'll have neo-Nazis claim that, like, oh, I joined this because I wanted to protect women from being raped by, insert other race here. It goes back to this as well. This is everywhere, even in England. In England in the late 1200s, Jews were forced to wear a yellow star upon their clothing. In 1290, the Jews were exiled from England. They are kicked out of England. If you are Jewish, you cannot live in England. And they weren't allowed back in until 1655. This is really common. Most countries in Europe have expelled their Jews at some point or another. There's a reason why, if you play, I really like the game Crusader Kings 2. In Crusader Kings 2, I think it might be dependent on a DLC expansion, but as a player in Crusader Kings 2, you can kick out the Jewish population. Between the 12th and the 14th centuries, France expelled their Jewish population, take their property, and ransomed it back to them several times. So they would kick everyone out, take all their property, go, hey, you want this stuff? Pay me. And then a little bit later, oh, you can move back in, and they'd repeat the process. So there's this long history of Jews being forced to go everywhere in Europe. This is a map, which this doesn't even show all of them. This just shows kind of the more major ones. So every color is a country that expelled their Jews at different times. So, for example, Lithuania in 1445 and 1495. The lines indicate where they went afterwards. So the Jews kicked out of Lithuania, went to Crimea, went to Poland, etc., etc. And you can see that, Poland didn't really expel their Jews ever. That actually helped them. But there's this mass movement of Jewish individuals over Europe. One of the big reasons, in addition to just general anti-Semitism, why they're being kicked out, is that this was profitable for a ruler. If you had a bunch of Jewish individuals in your country who, again, a lot of them were money lenders, if you kicked them out, that money was now yours. Or if you got money from them, so you're the king of England, you borrowed a bunch of money from a wealthy Jewish family, you kick them out, you don't have to pay that loan back. So it's very profit motivated, as well as religious. For example, 1492, I believe, is the really big kind of Inquisition. It would eventually result in Inquisition, where it's mostly being done for religious reasons, that they think they're gonna make God love them more if they kick out the Jews. Yes. Horribly depressing. When I teach my Holocaust unit, oftentimes my homework is just like, do something that makes you happy, or I'll play like videos of puppies in the last 5 minutes of class. One of the biggest sort of issues, or I don't know if biggest issues, I don't know how I'll put it, but in 1348 to 1351, the Black Death, the Black Plague, was just sweeping through Europe. The COVID of its day, except even worse, because they didn't have like any medicine at all. So at this point, it's sweeping through Europe. It's killing just everyone. 30 to 60% of Europe's population died during this time, and Jews are blamed. One of the reasons why the Jews are blamed is just straight up anti-Semitism, but they're also being blamed because they were less affected by the Black Plague. One reason is due to isolation. If the Black Plague came into a city, it's usually being carried by Christians, and if that city has a walled ghetto, there's less transmission, so it's kind of the social distancing of its day. If you're at home, you're less likely to get COVID. If you're in the ghetto, you're less likely to get the Black Plague. Another big thing that helped out was that the Jews, were kind of ahead of their time in cleanliness. Jewish religious laws have specific times where you're supposed to wash in specific ways in order to be considered, ritually clean. And this turns out to help when, washing your hands was unknown at the time. You have to remember that this is, when people eventually figured out, like, hey, maybe washing your hands will get germs off of them, there were doctors pushing back against it. So back then, it was seen as a weird Jewish thing that they washed all this time, but it helped them not get the plague. Unfortunately, because this is, the Middle Ages, this led to Jews being accused of being the ones behind the plague. Jews were accused of poisoning wells. This is sort of an artwork from the time, or from later on, but of Jews supposedly pouring, Black Plague juice into the wells, and the hundreds of Jewish communities were destroyed in retaliation because they said, you're to blame. Yes, it's in Prague or something. I want to say I think the one I've seen is Poland, but Prague as well. Certain cities in Europe were almost entirely not affected by the plague due to the large amount of Jewish people living there, that it created kind of not quite like the effect you get from a vaccine. So it wasn't quite herd immunity, but it was somewhat similar. It was more like there's so many Jewish individuals that they're all washing their hands and, doing the good cleanliness stuff, that the few who don't aren't able to spread it. I'll have to, there's a really good GIF that I've seen that I know I've posted at various points, which shows on a map of Europe the spread of the plague, and there's just this spot where it doesn't go. And someone had commented, like, oh, that's because of the Jewish individuals. So, and again, this is something that, especially due to the science at the time, there's no way to disprove this. So they're thinking like, oh, we kill all these Jews, we're going to make things better. Because again, medicine is pretty much unknown. Doctors don't start washing their hands after going to the bathroom until the 1840s. There's no hope for, in 1348. That's not going to help anybody. However, one of the most enduring things that is still around in some areas is what's called either blood libel or the ritual murder libel. What this is it was a widespread belief that some people still believe, though mostly it's just like the really out there cults and like the neo-Nazis. It was a belief that certain Jewish holy rituals required that you kill and drink the blood of a Christian child. So, again, this is a point where, despite there being a fair amount of Jewish individuals in Europe, Christians didn't really know anything about Jewish religion. They knew it was a religion, they knew it was somehow different, they're like, but they didn't really know anything about it. So these rumors spread that at certain points of years, and it depends on when you hear the rumor of when these things are, that you had to have that. So the result of this was that anytime, and this was a really widespread belief, so anytime in medieval Europe, or even, I think it even went up to like Victorian ages in some parts of the world, anytime a child died mysteriously or vanished, it was common to blame the Jews. Anytime. Missing kid, blame the Jews. Just look around. So the thing about so Hitson saying how Christians existed in ancient Jewish times, who knows? You have to realize that the traditionally in religious classes and stuff like that, or even in like just kind of a bare basic history class, you'll get the Christians came from Jews. It's a bit more complicated than that, and essentially by this point, it had become so separated that it wasn't even a thing. Like, there's a whole lot of interesting research. I'm forgetting the name of the guy I've heard give some really good talks at like atheist conferences about how, you know, the story in the Bible is not true of how Christians emerged. They were not the followers of Jesus. It's more, and again, I'm going to get some of this wrong because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's more like there were a whole lot of kind of spin-offs of Judaism or spin-offs of other local religions that kind of mushed together and became Christians. Again, not a very good thing. Definitely a whole lot. Dive into the sort of atheism community on YouTube, on other websites. I wish I could remember the name of the specific guy that I've heard a lot of speeches by, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff out there about the sort of real historical origin of Christianity. So that's actually a good point. Yeah, Jews are fairies. It's one of those that, you know, it's a very much an us versus them mentality that, in my, you know, not professional opinion, humans like to think that, oh, we couldn't have done this, or that's so odd, there must be some other explanation. You see it with, you know, a child goes missing. You want to blame someone outside of your group, be that another race, you know, another nationality, another religion, be that, you know, extraterrestrial fairies, etc. It reminds me of very much the comparison of people have said, like, hey, maybe all those accounts of changelings in the past are actually historical accounts of people with autism or autism spectrum stuff. So very commonly, this belief that Jews were killing Christian children, usually very young Christian children. I think most of the people sort of identified as being killed in this way were under, I want to say under 12, and very often very teeny. So there are frequent outbreaks of mob violence. A kid goes missing, someone points the finger at Jewish individuals in the community, and usually a whole lot of people end up dead. The Catholic Church did not help this. The Catholic Church actually helped to encourage it, to ensure that it continued happening. Because very often they would make these children who had gone missing victims, and they would make them to saints. So there are still several saints who are like venerated that are part of their sort of saint backstories that they were killed by Jews. Again, most likely didn't happen. Yes, probably there were some that were maybe killed by Jews just because there are horrible people everywhere in every religion, but it was not an organized thing. For example, one of those is Simon of Trent, who was a 3-year-old murdered in 1475. The Jews were blamed for killing him in a blood libel or ritual murder, and 15 Jews were burnt at the stake for his murder. And there's even some churches today, like I remember reading about one, I think in England, that has the body of a child who was believed to have been killed in this way. And I don't think he was a full-blown saint. He was whatever the step right before sainthood is, because, you know, there's steps. Of course, also, there's the Crusades. Crusades are a series of religious wars focused on recovering Jerusalem and the Holy Lands from Muslim rule. What'd you miss? We're doing a overview of anti-Semitism before we go into kind of what would be like the first introductory lesson of a Holocaust unit. So we're currently talking about the Crusades and how Christians attacked and killed thousands of European Jews on the way. So it'd be like, hey, you're in Lyon, France, and you're deciding to go on the Crusades. As you go, you're just going to be sort of killing Jews along the way. And you're going to be fine with that. Ooh. What was... Thank you for following. I don't know. It's my little thing is not working very well. Yay for stuff. I said, like, this is literally the second time I've ever streamed, and while I'm enjoying it, I don't know what the heck I'm doing most of the time. So they were attacking Jews along the way. They're attacking Jews in the Holy Land. Not very good. Naruto is garbage. I have never watched or read Naruto, despite the fact that I once participated in a Naruto. Well, it wasn't D&D. I think it was 7 Seas was the system we used, and a friend of mine was running it, and I was like, hey, I want to participate in this, but I don't know Naruto, and they gave me a really basic rundown, which I have completely forgotten since then. I was a Yu-Gi-Oh person. I still am a bit of a Yu-Gi-Oh person. So Crusades are like, we're going to reclaim the Holy Land for Christians. The Muslims were in control of the Holy Land at this point. The Christians wanted to be in control of the Holy Land. They didn't really care about the Jews. Again, historically, hatred of Jews has just been considered okay. Kind of one of the things that I say a lot to my kids when I teach history is, historically, things have been horrible. History is a study of things are getting a little less horrible, but they are still horrible. I never did the game for Yu-Gi-Oh! I was just into the. I never even actually watched the anime. I was just into it from like the fan. I don't even know, from the fan fiction side of things and the manga side of things. I used to have the whole manga. I had to get rid of it the last time I moved because I had too many books. Hello, do you want to say hi to chat? Hello, everyone. This is my cat, Mythos. He is a little brat. He is named after a character in the TV show Highlander, which, if you have seen the movie Highlander, the TV show is pretty much the same thing, but better, because the main actor can actually do sword fights. Are you going to be nice, or am I going to have to put you in... Oh my gosh, you are shedding so much. How are you shedding that much? You are not a long-haired cat. He's still a bit grumpy with me because I'm moving next weekend, and so I had to go to the vet to, get him checked out to make sure he's fine and to get him some, calm the heck down medicine for the car ride, so he's still not entirely happy with me. Hi, you just gonna sit there? You can just sit there, but you can't bug me or try to bite me. He's a jerk, but I named him after a jerk, so I can only have myself to blame. So sort of as going back to this, but it's fun. It's fun to chat. One of the leaders of the First Crusades is a dapper-looking gentleman here, Godfrey Bouillon, which I'm probably mangling the pronunciation, but I speak some French, so I tend to default to French whenever I'm trying to pronounce something. Usually still pronounce it horrible. He's the leader of the First Crusade, and one of the vows he made was he said, I'm not going to leave a single member of the Jewish race alive. So attempts to destroy the Jewish race, again, historically very, very common, because you see First Crusade, 1096. Ugh. California. I love living in California, but California has 3 seasons. Wet, dry, and on fire. And currently we are in the on fire season. So, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. I have to make that joke. It always makes me really sad whenever there's kids that don't get that joke, because I'm teaching kids, and kids don't get many jokes. Most people have at least some basic knowledge of the Spanish Inquisition, even if it's just from the Monty Python sketch. The Spanish Inquisition was a tribunal to identify heretics and bring them to justice. Tribunal is a court, basically. It's a religious court. Heretics is anyone who is not Christian or is not Christian in the correct way. I'm in kind of central northern California, about 2 hours with traffic south of San Francisco. And I'm on the coast, so it's a little bit more moist than it is in other areas. I'm gonna be moving though. Next week when I'm moving to go. I'm unemployed right now, and due to COVID, probably not gonna get a job until maybe January. So I'm moving in with my father, who lives in the Central Valley. But even then, we do have wet. Yeah, anyone who is not the right kind of Christian. Again, modern day, it's very hard for people to understand that because there are a bazillion different kinds of Christian. You go to even the smallest towns, there's usually like 2 churches, if not more. Methodist, Episcopal, all that stuff. This is before all of that. So this is at a point where it's the Catholic Church or nothing. If you disagree even a little bit with the Catholic Church, you are going straight to hell, you're an agent of Satan, and they want to kill you. So Spanish Inquisition is focusing on that. It is also focusing on witches, which tends to be drummed up more because we find witches interesting. But it's anything. You disagree with the church in any way, shape, or form, you're going to be a victim of the Spanish Inquisition. But a big thing they were focusing on is people who they said were pretending to be Catholic. In 1496, the King and Queen of Spain had issued a royal decree. That decree ordered all Jews and Muslims, which there was a fairly significant population in Spain since it's kind of near Africa pretty much. They'd ordered all of them to convert. They said, you're either going to convert to Christianity or we're going to kick you out of the country. Some of them left, some of them converted, but the thing was that they thought some of them weren't actually really converting. So while about 40,000 Jews left the country, the Inquisition focused on torturing and burning alive conversos whose faith was in question. So these are people who had converted to Christianity, but they went, we don't think you're actually Christian. It's interesting to note that a lot of times, and I'm trying to cast my mind back to the various classes I took about witchcraft in college in my general reading, very often you would get not single women necessarily. There were cases where single young women were accused of being witches, but a lot more commonly it would be older women whose husbands had died, or women who were in some way the other. So like the Salem witch trials, one of the first people accused of being a witch in the Salem witch trials was I believe an African Caribbean slave. She might have been native. I can't remember specifically what her ethnicity was, but she was an enslaved woman who had, I believe, come from the Caribbean or come from an island. So she was, other as in both the color of her skin, and she had, it wasn't voodoo, but like we would kind of associate it with a sort of voodoo-esque religion. Then it spread to other women in the community. Very often, accusation of witchcraft were rooted in money, in family arguments. There's a lot of really interesting books that you can read about, like the Salem witch trials in specific, but other witch trials also, which go into, looking at why people were accused. But yeah, definitely there was a sexual element to a lot of witch trials. You've chosen. Yeah. Again, history is a long line of horribleness getting slightly less horrible. So, of course, here comes Martin Luther, founder of Protestant Christianity, with his very hilarious, I don't know why, but this hat just makes me giggle whenever I see it. So, Martin Luther is kind of seen in very casual history as this kind of champion of, religious freedom. He's not. He was critiquing the church, and he's pounding his famous list of things he found wrong with the church, which led to that explosion of different denominations, which we have today. Most obvious being Protestants were protesting. But Martin Luther also wrote a thing called On Jews and Their Lies. Here it is in, German title. In 1543. In this book, he argued that Jewish synagogues, homes, and schools should be burned, that rabbis, Jewish priests, should be forbidden to preach, that no mercy or kindness should be shown to Jews, and that we are at fault in not slaying them. So this guy is saying that if you're not killing Jews, you are not doing your Christian duty. Martin Luther was a massive racist. Most people were massive racists. And they were even more racist than we would think of nowadays, because nowadays, when we think of racism, we think of primarily religious and skin color racism. So we think of, yeah, he did nice. We think of, people being racist, for example, in America, against African Americans, against Muslim individuals. But back then, it was even more common to be racist, even against other white people. Something I say over and over to my students when I teach history. For thousands and thousands of years, the English and French have hated each other's guts. The fact that, even nowadays, the English and French don't like each other all that much. Racism was even more common, I would say, in the past, and there was, more kinds of racism. Nowadays, while the various groups of Christians don't always get along, you're not really, in general, getting, religious wars between Protestants and Catholics. There's still tensions and stuff, especially in certain areas, but it's not just as common as it was. There's one of my really great students had a really great way of putting it that I'm only half remembering, but it was basically like, as time has gone by, we still see color, but we see less colors. So, there's exceptions, but in general, it's just like, oh, you're white. Oh, you're African or of African descent, Oh, you're Arab, stuff like that. Yeah, Ireland being the specific example of how, I would point to Ireland and go, everywhere used to be the Irish Troubles, all that stuff, which I'm not the best expert on. I have very casual knowledge of it just because I didn't really study it in focus at any point in my academic career, and because of the California standards, I don't have to teach it as much. I'll get into that some later point probably. So, very, very widespread. You just can't underestimate. There's some indication that maybe Martin Luther changed his views on his deathbed before he died. He went shit, I'm a horrible person. But this book, On the Jews and Their Lives, was super, super influential. Super influential. So even if he changed his views on his deathbed, he still wrote horrible stuff that did horrible things. And resulted in a lot of pogroms. So pogrom is a violent riot aimed at the massacre or persecution, though most commonly massacre, of an ethnic or religious group. Usually when we use the word pogrom, we are referring to an anti-Semitic riot. You will sometimes have people... Sorry, the cat made a weird noise, and I had to make sure he wasn't causing shenanigans. No shenanigans. Thank you. Usually refers to an anti-Semitic riot. Sometimes you'll get people use the word pogrom for other ethnic groups, other religions, but most commonly it's being used to describe an attack on Jewish individuals. The word also carries the implication that either the government is encouraging the riots or at the very least not stopping them. The word pogrom is a Russian word. It means to harm. The meaning of, the riot meaning became attached to the word during the 1880s when a wave of pogroms swept through Russia under Alexander III. Alexander III we had talked about briefly in the last stream we did, which you can find that stream, and you will, in the future, find this stream archived on the YouTube that I just linked in the chat. Alexander III is one of the czars of Russia. Sort of very quick glance is that he wanted to unify Russia. One of the ways that he wanted to unify Russia was by making everyone the same. So he wanted to get rid of Jewish individuals. And there were a lot of Jews who lived in Russia. Mostly because the history of Russia is very much if you're in Russia and you don't like the Tsar, just move, out into the Siberia area. And you'll get things done. Alexander Graham Bell, which I think, isn't there something like that he stole the phone from somewhere else? The history of inventions, especially in America, is a big long line of he said, she said over whether you steal stuff from other people. But Alexander's also a really popular name for nobility because Alexander the Great. Everyone wants to be the great, so a lot of European royalty had Alexander as one of their stable of names that they reused. So pogroms continued under the Tsars and even into the Russian Civil War, looking into the future of the USSR. Both sides led pogroms. So even when we get to the point where it's the Tsar versus the communists, both of them did not like Jewish individuals. Sometimes the communists were a little bit better because some of the early leaders of communist Russia were, I'd say, more culturally Jewish than religiously Jewish. I want to say Lenin was from a Jewish family, but I feel like I'm wrong when I say that, so I don't So don't quote me on that, but I know that some of the higher up members of the Russian communists, early Russian communists, were from Jewish families, albeit I think in most cases they were not very religious Jewish families. So, anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, Judaism. Again, some of this just, did I accidentally, oh no, that's my sum up slide. I thought for a minute I'd put two slides together. So anti-Semitism dates back really far, very common throughout history, very widespread. Things didn't really change that much as we moved out of the Middle Ages into the Renaissance. Really sort of the first big change in anti-Semitism comes in the 19th century when it gets a scientific side to it. Again, massive quotations. Several times in this, and when I teach the Holocaust, multiple times when I teach the Holocaust, I'm talking about bad science. At the time, they didn't know it was bad science, but now we know it's bad science. So in the 19th century, this theory of racial anti-Semitism develops. Basically, you take anti-Semitism, but add in, horrible racism of the belief that the white race is superior to others. The image on the slide is actually from a college level textbook of the time, and it's showing how they believed. Sorry, I'm selling something on Craigslist, so I have to check to see when that person is coming. Because I just casually doing 5 things. And I can't multitask to save my life when I actually have to. This is showing how at the time they thought that it was good science to believe that there was this sort of tower that you could put people on, that certain races were closer to monkeys than they were to people. Running through this, some of these we know what they mean. We know what Caucasian means. We know what Chinese means. Hottentot was a phrase that was used to refer to Africans. So Hottentot means African individuals. And when they say Australian, they are, of course, referring to Aboriginal Australians. They are not talking about white Australians. They're talking about the native people of Australia. So you can see that they thought there's less intelligence you have as you go further up. It's not quite phrenology. Phrenology is more that you can read the bumps on the skulls and it tells you something. It's kind of like palm reading. Phrenology is kind of palm reading, but for your skull. This is more them saying that certain races of humans are more evolved than others. Naruto's garbage, some of that we covered earlier. The why Christians are anti-Semitic. The big one goes back to that they blame Jews for killing Jesus. So a lot of it goes back to that. And a lot of it goes back to an us versus them mentality. That from the beginning, or at least especially at the beginning, Christians kind of had to fight Jews for who was going to get the more people. And yeah, race is a social construct. The problem is it's a social construct that has real implications. But at this time, they didn't know that. They thought that race was a scientific thing. And I'm not a scientist. I'm a history teacher. I am a high school history teacher focused. So I can't really go in depth as that as maybe not a biologist, but as more of a science person would be able to say. But yeah, race is a social construct. Unfortunately, that doesn't negate it as being a thing that has an impact on people's life. So a lot of times this will be called social Darwinism, the idea that you can rank races, that some are better than others, basically applying Darwin's theory of evolution in really messed up ways, in ways that nowadays good scientists go, no, that's bullshit. But they believed it. So Jews were seen as a distinct race. They were not seen as white. If you were Jewish, you were not seen as white. And they were seen as inferior, as worse than. Therefore, this marks a shift, because this is the point where it goes from hating Jews for kind of religious reasons to hating Jews for racial reasons. So at this point, they're saying, even if a Jewish person converts, they're still Jewish and they're still worse. Yeah, as I said, this is not my area of expertise. So race is highly, highly complicated. Highly encourage you to check out, again, the wonderful thing about the internet is there are better experts out there than me. This is the casual, the very, what I can remember from different classes I've taken on that sort of thing. So, And anti-Semitism continues. For example, in 1894, there's the Dreyfus Affair in France. This gentleman here, Captain Alfred Dreyfus, he was of Jewish descent, but was not, like, practicing religiously Jewish. And he was sentenced to life imprisonment for giving military secrets to the Germans. This is pre-World War I. So before World War I is even the thing. This gentleman, Dreyfus, is basically, he's being convicted of being a spy. The problem is that in 1896, evidence came to light that Dreyfus had been framed. Like, really good, very obvious evidence. If Dreyfus had not been a spy, he had been the fall guy. But despite that evidence coming to light, the army didn't do anything. The army just kept blaming Dreyfus. They said, nope, Dreyfus did it, Dreyfus did it, Dreyfus did it. While all this information is coming out showing very clearly that Dreyfus was not a spy. In 1899, the cover-up was exposed in newspapers. Dreyfus got a new trial. So the cover-up has been exposed. Everyone knows Dreyfus didn't do anything. He's still convicted. And again, there's a whole lot of books written about this, but pretty much all of it is he was Jewish. They're like, oh, we'll blame it on this guy. He's Jewish. No one cares. It wasn't until 1906 that Dreyfus was actually pardoned and eventually freed. He spent a whole bunch of time of that intervening years, I believe, in like South America and like a French penal colony, which are messed up places. But even though he was eventually freed, and I don't think if he got compensation, he did not get like anywhere near adequate compensation. But this sparked kind of a fresh wave of anti-Semitism in France. At this point in France, so again, this is pre-World War I, at this point in France, there were a bunch of rumors circulating that basically said that the Jews were involved in white slave trade, so slave trade for prostitution purposes. Because at this point in France, a lot of Jewish families owned sort of the precursor to like department stores. So like kind of like a Sears, but, you know, obviously smaller and more clothes focused. And there was a rumor circulating that said that in these Jewish-owned stores where you could buy pre-made clothing as opposed to getting clothing tailored for you, they said in those stores there are secret trap doors in the changing rooms where if a white woman walks in, she'll go down the trap door and be sold off into sexual slavery somewhere. And they were like burning department stores because of this. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Mata Hari was accused of being Jewish. I don't know if she was. I haven't looked into Mata Hari that much, mostly because I think a while back I'd read something that basically said she wasn't that important. It was just kind of played up because people thought it was cool. So I haven't looked into Mata Hari, who's a famous spy, who apparently was not a very good spy and was not ever really but again, I haven't looked into it much. It's also around this time, 1903, that this trash is put out. Protocols of the Elders of Zion is horrible. It is the most long-lasting trash kind of ever. It was first published in Russia. It's fake. It is not real. It was a hoax. It was written to be a fake document. So it's an anti-Semitic hoax which lays out a conspiracy theory that Jews are secretly plotting to take over the world. So if you read Protocols, it's set up like it's the account of a meeting, like notes on a meeting being recorded. And it says, oh, we're going to take over the world. Protocols lives on despite the fact that no one should goddamn believe it. It was proved fake only a few years after it was published, but people keep publishing it. For example, in the 1920s, Henry Ford of Ford Motors, the car guy, believed the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was real, and he funded the printing of over 500,000 copies. So this specifically is, this is not Ford printing, but you can see this is from like a Cold War era because it says, possession of these documents in Soviet Russia is punished by immediate death. So this thing has legs. Again, it had been proved fake earlier. Like, originally, it was basically written on commission for, like, the Tsar of Russia / nobles. And at this point, when it was written, they'd said, that's stupid, no one will believe it, but people believed it. 1921, newspapers proved that it was fake, but it's still super available today, and a lot of people still believe that it's real. Yeah, I read some of it a while ago. I have not read the whole thing because I don't want to submit myself to that, but I'd read like a bunch of excerpts from it and been like, this reads like, horrible. I wrote better fanfic when I was in middle school. So it's still super available. Here is, I can't remember if this, I think it's Japanese, it's apparently super popular in Japan for some reason. Like I think I read somewhere that it's seen as like an example of business strategy or something. Here's I don't know why, but I really like this cover of a Spanish version because I like, okay, you've got, money, you've got church, Nazis, communists, and Freemasons are all like finger gloves of Judaism. So Protocols of Elders of Zion, still really popular, still advocated by a lot of kind of horrible people, and still believed by kind of just not stupid people, but just kind of people that don't know better sort of thing. But in 1848, things got a bit better in Germany. Oh, thank you, Naruto's garbage. That warms the cockles of my heart. Though to be fair, I have written some really terrible fanfic that is still floating around on the internet out there that if you look hard enough, you can probably still find, because I think I still have links to it somewhere. Anyway, 1848, Germany, things are getting better. In Germany at this point, so again, 1848, pre-World War I. So if you have, it's fine to have a basic understanding of history. If you can just divide history into this is before that, that works. We can still work on that. 1848, Germany, things have gotten a little bit better. In Germany at this point, before World War I, legally, Jews are the same as Gentiles. Gentiles being non-Jews, Jewish term for non-Jewish individuals. So, yeah, anti-Semitism would still be a thing in Germany, but legally, there was no difference. It's not quite like American freedom of religion sort of thing, but it is a little bit more like you can't have rules that are specifically for Jews. 1910, the German Jewish population was up to a fair amount. Fun fact about me, I have trouble reading numbers. I have actually been diagnosed with a thing called dyscalculia, which if you know what dyslexia is, dyscalculia is dyslexia but with numbers. And I think one of the ways that for me, the two ways that I've noticed it, or the three ways I've noticed it manifesting for me is, one, I have a hard time reading like a traditional, traditional clock. I have a hard time scheduling stuff. I'm always early to everything because I can't quite grasp how long stuff takes to do. And I think the third way it really affects me is I have a really hard time reading numbers. So let's see if I can do this. 615,000 Jews are living in Germany. About 79,000 of them had come from Russia. So due to the pogroms in Russia under Alexander III, a lot of Jews had immigrated to Germany. There were very large Jewish communities in Germany at this time, pre-World War I. During World War I, more German Jews fought in the war than any other ethnicity, religious, or political group in Germany. So if you look at the makeup of Germany's army in World War I, the vast majority of them are Jewish. This is an image of a Jewish regiment, 1916, celebrating Hanukkah. And about 12,000 of them died for their country. After the war, this was an advertisement printed in some papers that showed, we served. There was also on the non-fighting side of World War I, a lot of prominent Jewish industrialists and bankers who helped to supervise the German war economy to keep things from going horrible, to make sure that there's still enough of everything being produced. However, World War I is going to mark the point where things start kind of, not necessarily the inevitable slip toward the Holocaust, but very definitely like strong indications that the Holocaust is going to happen. Because in 1918, when World War I ended, Germany was taken completely by surprise. This is something that's not mentioned as much in sort of textbooks as I would like, but during World War I, Germany had a really good propaganda machine. Germany was really good at making sure that the newspapers only printed what they wanted to have happen. So if you were an average German citizen, sitting at home during World War I, maybe you got a son or something off, fighting in the war, you're reading the newspaper, all of the newspapers are saying, we're going to win this. They would basically report the wins and not report the losses. So from the German perspective, World War I was, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. We're not winning, we've lost. And they were completely taken aback by this. Because again, from their perspective, it was like they had thought they were, 10 points up in some sports game and then they lost the game by 100 points. Because of the propaganda machine was really good. They were really good at censoring newspapers. So when World War I ended, Germany looked at that and understandably thought there was something hinky going on. So they looked around for someone to blame. And this led to the rise of what was called the stab in the back myth. It was a belief that in World War I, the German army did not lose on the battlefield, that they were betrayed. And you'll see here two different versions of this myth. One with, politicians being the one. It's a little hard to see in this copy, but this is a line of troops in a trench. It was, seen as, the politicians stabbed us in the back. Eventually it's going to turn into the Jews. Yes, the Germans were also really messed up by the Treaty of Versailles. But this is even before the treaty is signed. This is happening, that people are going, what the heck happened? So first they blamed politicians, specifically a group called the November Criminals. These were members of the government who had stepped forward to sign the armistice, pretty much. But soon they started blaming the Jews. And there's a variety of reasons for this. Some of the November Criminals were Jewish. Also just, again, anti-Semitism, pretty much. Jews are accused of not being patriotic. So there's a variety of reasons why the Jews are the ones who become the person doing the stabbing. But it kind of you can boil it down pretty much to anti-Semitism rears its head. It's easiest to go, hey, this is the other. Treaty of Versailles super messed up Germany, and really was messed up in general. I'll have to for some future stream, I'll have to pull up my Treaty of Versailles slide so we can go over it because, it not. So it's at this point when we get everyone's favorite failed painter. Again, this is there's more to it than this. This is when I teach this lesson, it's after we've done a whole thing on the rise of the Nazi Party. So this is kind of just a review to try and remind the kids of what we learned earlier. So at this point, Hitler had emerged as leader of the Nazis. His beliefs are shaping their policy. Specifically, the beliefs that are important for this is that he believed that Jews were similar to germs, that they poisoned society. He believed that along with the Weimar Republic, Weimar Republic is the government of Germany after World War I. Before World War I, Germany was basically a monarchy. After they had a more republican form of government, that sucked. The Weimar Republic was like one of the worst failed governments ever. Yes, the Treaty of Versailles was kicking a dog when it's down, and Weimar Republic got blamed for that pretty much, even though they did their best. Again, Hitler's really into racial purity, especially because Hitler is not into communism. And again, there was a strong element in Jewish communities of younger, sort of well-educated Jewish individuals being into communism, so that didn't help things. So Hitler says we need to make everyone the same. We need to get rid of Jews, because again, Jews are seen as a different race. We need to fight communism. That'll help us regain our power. Specifically, he believes Aryans are the superior race, Jews are an inferior race, Aryans being Germans. Yes, Hitler is always a good thing to say. He also believes that Germany needs more living space, that the country could grow. This is kind of rooted in a pre-World War I / even into this era understanding of power. You have to remember, this is a time in history where, even during this, after World War I, it was the time where the sun never set on the British Empire. Where, what that means, because some people don't get that, sun never set on the British Empire. England, Britain, had colonies all around the globe. So it was always day at some point. And England was, for that reason, but also for other reasons, a very powerful player in the world scene. So a lot of other countries saw that as, if we are bigger, we are going to be more powerful. Which is true. There's more to it than that, but that is true. So part of the Treaty of Versailles was that Germany, which didn't have a lot of colonies to begin with, lost their colonies. They had some colonies in Africa and some colonies in Asia, sort of over China area. So Germany had been reduced to just Germany. Like roughly, if you look on a map today, that's sort of what Germany had been reduced to. So he's saying we need to expand. One early way of expanding is get rid of the Jews and you can take their stuff. Yeah, England had, I think 1995, because I can actually dimly remember, because I was born in 1990, so I can dimly remember seeing on the news like the changeover of Hong Kong being given to China. So yeah. England is still, and England, it doesn't really have an empire anymore, but it still has, I'm forgetting the term, but there's still like they still have fairly friendly relations with Australia and Canada and stuff. So, we're not over colonialism yet. So Hitler believes that Jews are taking up what space they did have. He wants to get rid of them. Obviously, Hitler is a horrible person. I hope that I'm not the first person to tell you that, but Hitler's a horrible person. So when the Nazis started to take control in 1933, they're in control of the government. They're able to put what laws they have in place. So they start passing various laws. They pass the Law for Restoration of the Professional Civil Service. This law means that Jews cannot be doctors, teachers, or lawyers. There were some kind of... for a while, Jews could still be doctors to other Jews, but, this is cutting them out of that area of life. There was the law against the overcrowding of German schools, which limited how many Jews could be enrolled in German schools to 1.5 of total enrollment. So if you have 100 students in a school, one student can be Jewish. And this is important because this one was aimed more at college level. I don't remember if they had specifically colleges, but it's college level stuff. And, even today, for most people, if you want to get a job that can support you, you need a college degree. That wasn't as much true back then, but it is going to be cutting. They've already said you can't be a doctor anymore if you're Jewish. Now they're ensuring that you can't even learn how to be one. So you couldn't, practice, semi-illegally. There's also the Citizenship and Denaturalization Law, which meant that Germany gave itself the ability to take away citizenship from anyone who was undesirable. If they don't like you, they go, hey, guess what? Yoink, you're not a German citizen anymore. And like with American citizenship, nowadays, being a citizen gives you certain things. America's, at least in theory, a little bit better about applying stuff that's intended for citizens to non-citizens, but that wouldn't be the case back then. They also institute the hereditary farm law, which forbids Jews from owning farmland or engaging in agriculture. And they start creating what are called chambers of culture. These are groups that regulate activity in artistic endeavors. So they would sort of basically push Jews out of film, music, theater, fine arts, literature, broadcasting, and the press. So this is 1933, and I think some of these were instituted later, but starts this wave of just pushing Jews to the outskirts of society. Pushing Jews into positions where the only jobs they are able to hold are relatively low paying, are not very stable, and, just is not going to support them. So they're not, at this point, Germany is not, it's not Holocaust. They're not killing people. They're kind of basically going, get the heck out. They're making them feel very unwelcome, to put it, nicely. And then, on September 15th of 1935, the first of the Nuremberg laws are passed, Nuremberg being a city in Germany. One of them is the Law for Protection of German Blood and German Honor. This made it illegal for marriages or even extramarital intercourse between Jews and Germans. I can make a test if you want. I set up a Google. There's see if I can point the right. There's a Google Classroom. I could set up a test over there. Test you on this. Pull out the test. There's a test for this material if you really want it. Maybe I'll put that up afterwards. So this makes it illegal for if you are Jewish, you cannot marry a German, and technically you can't even have sex with a German. And yes, they would do that because extramarital intercourse, having sex without being married, illegal. Also illegal to get married. It also forbid German women under 45 from working in Jewish households. So basically as maids and stuff like that. If you were German, you could not work in a Jewish household. And this goes back to that fear we were talking about earlier of anti-Semitism as a fear of Jewish individuals wanting non-Jewish women. This was that. They thought, they phrased it basically as we are protecting women from having to work in these horrible people's houses. Yeah, hey guys, I get the feeling the Germans don't like us. Should we leave? We'll talk about why they didn't in a bit. But yeah. There's also the Reich citizenship law, Reich being basically Germany. Forgetting exactly what it translates to as, but it's kind of like land. So the German citizenship law is how you can essentially translate that. The Reich citizenship law said that only Germans or those of related blood could be citizens. This gets into, which when I teach this unit, I go into more depth in a later lesson, of the interesting ideas that Germans had about race. So this is saying you have to be ethnically German, because again, this is a time where white is not really, it's, are you a white German, are you an Aryan? So it declared only those of German blood or related blood could be citizens. So there were certain nationalities where they said, oh, you're basically German. The one that comes to mind is Austrian. They saw Austrian as being so Austria, like, not Australia, Austria. Austria as being German, which is especially important because Hitler was originally from Austria. Hitler was not technically German. Hitler actually, like, illegally immigrated to Germany at one point. So everyone else, if you're not of German blood, you are a state subject. You're not a citizen. It was this state subject was like the title of what you had. You don't have the rights of a citizen. So you are quite literally, you're not even really a second-class citizen. You're just second-class. So Neruda's garbage, it's not from work. It's that they believe that all Jews are horrible rapists. Yeah, this is not protect them from working. This is them thinking if you have a young German woman in a Jewish household, the father of the husband is going to rape her. Because again, horribly, horribly racist. So it's not protect from work. They're sort of phrasing it that way, but it's that they believe that all, and again, there's a lot of propaganda you can find from Nazi Germany depicting Jewish individuals as like the worst. So, and you can see, this is Albany, New York from that time. Reich places Jews back in the Middle Ages. So, yeah, not a good time. Not the worst time to be Jewish in Germany, but not a good time to be Jewish in Germany. This right here is the one that always... So the Nazis had very specific ideas about how race worked. This is a chart that they had showing how they thought race worked with... this is a version that has translations put on. So basically, if you are of German blood, so you have to be of German blood in order to be a citizen. It's not like America where it's birth versus, naturalization. It's in Germany... You have to have the right ancestry to be a citizen. So they say, okay, you are of German blood if your parents and grandparents are German. So grandparents are German, parents are German, you are German blood, you're all good. So German blood right here. The difference between the circle and the little cross is, I can't zoom in on this image, I've zoomed it out previously. It's basically like, proof of it. So if you're of German blood, you can marry another person who's German blood. That's fine. That's what they want. If you're German blood and you marry someone who is like 1/4, that's okay. If you're of German blood, you can only marry someone who is half German if you have approval. If they are more than half German, the marriage is illegal. So the black here indicating how much non-German blood there is. And then they had all these specific, like, they went crazy into their, like, denominations of what you were. So half-breed is, obviously, half-breed is one parent German, one parent non-German. And again, if you have only a fourth, you can marry. But anything else is not going to be good. Even, so here you have 1/4 and 1/4 can't get married. Specifically because, again, I'm forgetting what the cross is basically like saying you have this many generations of German blood. So if you have that cross, you can't marry someone who doesn't have that cross. And again, completely. So we'll have here, and it gets really down to the nitty gritty. But something that's interesting to note is even after World War II starts and after the Holocaust is in full swing, there were exceptions to this. If you were high enough up in the Nazi Party, they'd allow this. And there was a bunch of cases where stuff came out that, like, certain high-ranking members of the Nazi Party were not actually, fully German. So the Nazi Party would basically just give them a certificate that said, yeah, no, you're fully German. So even though they have all these laws, if you're high enough up in the Nazi Party, if you're good enough friends with Hitler, they're willing to sort of fudge the laws. But yeah, I'll in the Google Classroom, I'll drop a link to these slides after the stream so that you can actually look at this, because I find this fascinating, like how the Nazis got really focused on minutia. And while we've lost some of the Nazi documents, mostly intentionally because they destroyed a whole bunch of stuff, the stuff that remains is ridiculous. And, like, I wish that I spoke German or read German, because I would love to read some of the documents that you don't really find translated, but I don't. And I'm really bad at languages, so I probably never will. So, question that comes up, question that came up sort of earlier, question that comes up all the time when I teach is, why the heck didn't they leave? Like, shit's going down. Why don't you get the heck out of Dodge? So, on the next slide, I'm going to show you a list of documents that you need in order to leave Germany. Before I show that slide, anyone want to make a guess as to how many documents you need? How many documents do you think you need if you are Jewish in order to immigrate out of Germany, in order to go somewhere else, move to America, move to somewhere else? How many documents do you think you need? Money is also good. I'll talk about money, but specifically documents. So I'm talking like, in my wallet, I have my ID card. Somewhere else in my house, I have my passport. 12, 6 to 10. Here are all the documents you need to leave Germany. And some of these you actually need multiple copies of them. So let's run through these, shall we? You have to have your passport, certificate from the local police noting the formal dissolution of residence in Germany. You have to go to the police and get a document that says we're leaving. We're not going to be at this address anymore. Certificate from the Reich Ministry of Finance approving immigration. You have to go to basically the German version of the IRS and get a document saying you can leave. Payment of an immigration tax, which is 25% of total assets valued at more than 50,000 Reichmark. Reichmark is their dollar. So you have to pay a tax. Submission of an itemized list of all gifts made to third parties since January 1st, 1931. So this is basically making it so you can't give your money to someone else to avoid the tax, pretty much. Payment of a capital transfer tax of 25%. Again, another tax. Certificate from the local tax office that there's no outstanding taxes due. Proof that you don't owe taxes. Certification from a currency exchange that all currency regulations have been followed. So if you're exchanging Deutsch or Reichsmarks for dollars, you have to have proof that you did that legally. Customs declaration dated no earlier than 3 days before departure, permitting the export of itemized personal and household goods. So customs is even looking at, like, your toothbrush. Submission of a list in triplicate, so you need 3 copies of this one, of all personal and household goods accompanying the immigrant. So anything you're bringing with you, you need to have a list. You need to have 3 copies of that list. Documents attesting to the value of personal and household goods and written explanations for why you need to take them out. So you can't just take whatever you want with you when you move. You have to write a list going, here's why I need this, why I'm taking it out of the country. Certificate from a currency exchange office permitting the export So again, permitting, another certificate, valid travel arrangements and entrance visas for another country. So valid travel arrangements, your ticket, you're getting, it's going to be mostly, it would have been train ticket if you were staying in Europe. It would have been a boat ticket if you're going outside of Europe. So you need to have those, but you also need to have entrance visas. So yeah, 14 documents, and I'm pretty sure I probably missed one because this, when I put this together, I was going off of another source. That's to leave Germany. On the next slide, I will show you a list of documents you need in order to enter the United States. Once again, I ask, how many documents do you think you're going to need? So last one was leaving Germany. This is saying like you're going to the U.S. If you're going to the U.S., how many documents do you think you need to enter the U.S. at this point, which is pre-World War II? Pre-World War II. I like how the estimate already this time Nutter is just like, yeah, I'm just going to go for a large number. So here are the documents you need to enter the United States. And again, a lot of these is you need several copies. So visa application, just a form, but you need 5 copies. And this is for one person. So if you have multiple people in the family, this number goes up. Birth certificate, 2 copies. Quota number, which established a person's place on the waiting list. So there was a waiting list to enter the United States. So, you go to like a grocery and you take a ticket at the meat counter, same thing. 2 sponsors, close relatives. So you have to have 2 people in the United States who are willing to say, yeah, you're going to be a good immigrant. The sponsors have to be American citizens or have permanent resident status. You have to have an affidavit of support and sponsorship, 6 copies. So your sponsors need to go, you're not going to be a drain on the U.S., and we will support you if you are. Copy of most recent federal tax return. So again, proof that you're paying your taxes in Germany. An affidavit from a bank about accounts. They want you to have money in the bank. They don't want people moving to the U.S. without any way to support themselves. Affidavit from any other responsible person regarding other assets. So anything that you have that's not in the bank. If you have land, if you have a car, you need to have a little things from someone saying that you have it. Certificate of good conduct from German police authorities. You have to get the German police to go, yes, this person is not a criminal. Police dossier prison record. So basically your criminal record. 2 copies of your criminal record if you have one. If you have a military record, they want 2 copies. Again, World War I had just ended, so that could be good or bad for you if you had a military record. Other government records about the individual. So that could be a number of other documents, not just the one I have it listed as. Affidavits of good conduct. People saying, yeah, this is a good person. Evidence of passing a physical examination at a U.S. consulate. You have to go to a doctor. Proof you're not bringing in any disease. Proof of permission to leave Germany, which was all the stuff on the previous slide. And proof that you've booked passes. So again, travel. So getting out of Germany was hard. And even though these are the requirements for the United States, many other countries had similar requirements. And actually, a lot of United States immigration law came about at this time in order to try and keep Jews out. So many Jews did try to leave. Some succeeded, some were unable to. And one of the worst things is a lot of Jews left, but they didn't go far enough. They went to Poland, they went to France, they went to other countries that eventually would be chewed up by the Nazi war machine. And there are some accounts of Jewish families who moved several times. France also, yes. There are people who went to France as well. I know I've read at least one account of like a Jewish family that ended up moving 3 times and still ended up being, consumed by the Holocaust. France, sort of looking forward a little bit, the refresher for anyone who's maybe a little dry on their World War II history. During World War II, France falls to Germany and basically just goes along with whatever Germany tells them to. So France was kind of split in half. There was the official French government, which went along with the Nazis, and there was the resistance, which was fighting them. The official French government handed over a lot of French Jews. It was just horrible. Oh, I think I've read that book, Ordinary Men. I've read a lot of books, understandably, about the Holocaust. I think I've read that one. There's a lot of really good books about examining how the heck just normal people could participate in it. Yeah, USA is massively anti-Semitic at this time. They're super, super freaking anti-Semitic. Everywhere is anti-Semitic at the time, but the USA was pretty darn anti-Semitic at this time. Yeah, there's a lot of messed up. Reading about the Holocaust, I find it very interesting. I also find it super depressing. So, recap of what we just talked about. 1933, Nazis take control of Germany, and they start passing laws which limit the ability of Jews to participate in German society. That includes jobs. There's the Nuremberg Laws, which outlaws marriages between Jews and non-Jews and takes away citizenship. And in August of 1938, Germany cancels all residence permits for foreigners. So what this is basically foreigners living in Germany, and there were a fair amount of them there, and they're just suddenly illegal. I mean, we're still pretty anti-Semitic after World War II. It takes a long time after World War II. I mean, we're still kind of anti-Semitic in ways that we don't realize. And I think, and definitely in different areas of the United States, there's differing levels. But one of the things you have to consider is, we talk about, neo-Nazis and how there's neo-Nazis out there. Neo-Nazis, I feel like when we talk about them, we tend to talk about them in the context of neo-Nazis not liking African Americans. You have to remember that neo-Nazis still really don't like Jewish individuals as well. And there's still, in the fairly recent past, there's been, attacks against Jewish synagogues. There's still, destruction of Jewish cemeteries, both in the United States and outside. So it's one of those that I think we don't see the anti-Semitism that exists as much as we've in some ways kind of transitioned to seeing things more as generally seeing racism and seeing, I mean, there's definitely, I'm not saying that there's I don't like to compare suffering and compare horribleness, but I think there's still a lot of anti-Semitic stuff out there that we don't realize is out there. This specifically creates a big problem because at the same time that Germany says if you're a foreigner you can't live here anymore, Poland had taken away citizenship for any Polish Jews who had lived abroad for at least 5 years. And you have to realize that in Europe at this time, it was much more common for people kind of just to move around. So this left about 12,000 people without a state because they'd lost their Polish citizenship and they weren't allowed to stay in Germany anymore. A lot of these were given one night to leave their homes and allowed only one bag to carry their belongings. So even before the Holocaust sort of officially starts off, you have, sort of almost like practice runs, you might want to call it. So for the question of why our language has a specific word, I would wager that there probably are words. History teacher, not an English teacher, and although I speak some French, I'm not fluent at all. So I think some of that might just have to do with the way that English makes words. Again, not a language person, but I don't know. So yeah, the simple answer, Death Priest, is I'm not an expert in that area. I'm not a linguist. I can't even talk correctly, as you can hear. I'm not a linguist, so I don't know specifically. The very simple thing I know is I would wager that it's how words are created in different languages. So for example, I know in French there was actually a controversy about the use of the phrase weekend as opposed to la fin de la semaine, the end of the week. So I would wager that probably plays a part in it. And you could probably find some interesting, and I know that I'm blanking on, I remember hearing at least one example of there are other languages that have specific words for kinds of racism. One of those among those Jewish individuals kicked out of Germany at the time was the family of this gentleman right here, who I'm going to mangle his name, because again, I'm not very good at it. I'm going to try, but I'm probably going to mangle. Herschel Grispan. His family was among those Jewish individuals who had been kicked out of Germany because they were technically Polish citizens, but they also lost their citizenship. At the time that happened, he was living in Paris with an uncle. And upon hearing of what happened to his parents, he went out and he bought a revolver and a box of bullets. And on November 7th, 1938, he went to the German embassy in Paris and shot this gentleman here, Ernst von Rath. So went to the German embassy, shot a German individual there. What's kind of not tragic, but sad about this is, this is an act of him trying to retaliate against the Germans for what's happened to his family. Von Rath had actually expressed anti-Nazi sympathies and was being investigated. So this was a anti-Nazi German individual who died as a result of the shooting. When he did this, because Herschel was caught very soon after the shooting, he carried a note which said, "May God forgive me. I must protest so that the whole world hears my protests, and that I will do." This is worth noting because it's used as an excuse to lash out against the Jews in Germany. The actions of one gentleman, and there's a whole bunch that's been written that maybe other things came into play as to why he decided to perform this action. But on November 9th, when Ernst von Rath dies of his wounds, he lingered for a little bit. Joseph Goebbels, who was the head of propaganda for the Nazis, delivered a speech. And he said, "The Fuhrer has decided that demonstrations should not be prepared or organized by the party, but insofar as they erupt spontaneously, they are not to be hampered." So he's saying Nazis aren't going to do this officially. He's saying, if you do something against Jews, we're not going to stop you. Unofficially, we're not doing anything. Or officially, we're not doing anything. Unofficially, he's advocating for Nazis to attack German Jews. And they even send out instructions that foreigners and non-Jewish businesses need to be protected, but otherwise the police should just allow the violence to happen. And also sends out instructions for Jews to be seized to be used as forced labor, so kind of slavery. Not quite slavery, but similar to slavery. And that's Kristallnacht. So in November 9, 1938, this results in Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, or Crystal Night, refers to all the broken glass of shop windows looking like crystals. And a lot of people will use this as kind of the official start to the Holocaust. It's a pogrom against Jews in Germany carried out by military forces and civilians. Over 260 synagogues are destroyed. Over 7,000 Jewish businesses are destroyed or damaged. And at least 91 Jews are killed. Over 30,000 Jewish men are arrested and sent to forced labor camps. So, and these are some of the images that you'll see of that. Again, a lot of Jews in Germany at this point owned kind of what we would categorize as like department stores. They're not going to be like, obviously, they're not going to be the size of like a Walmart or something, but that they're selling kind of prefabricated, not necessarily cheap, but more affordable goods. So there's destruction of glasses. There's a lot of, Jude is German for Jew, being, got a little hangman set up over here. So this is kind of the moment where we have a switch from Nazis trying to push Jews out of Germany to the violence that you'll see in much greater quantities when it comes to kind of the actual Holocaust. Night of Long Knives, I actually cannot remember that much about. I know Night of Long Knives is a clearing of the Nazi hierarchy. They got rid of a whole bunch of sort of higher up members of the Nazi party. But beyond that, off the top of my head, I can't remember much about it. So we have synagogues being destroyed, and these were very old, very large. You can tell sort of from these pictures how large these are, and completely destroying. Most of them will be even further destroyed later on. And here we have, on Kristallnacht, the Jews who were rounded up for forced labor were men. They are not yet rounding up everyone, and this is not being sent to a concentration camp. This is not being sent to being killed. This is being sent to somewhere where they're going to perform hard, back-breaking labor. A lot of them were released and then later on taken back in when the Holocaust sort of officially got going. Again, another image of some of the individuals who were swept up in Kristallnacht. And it was very clear to the rest of the world, that this was pretty much run by the Nazis. Here we have the New York Times, laying the blame on the Nazis. The Nazis tried to claim that they had stepped in to stop the riots, but they hadn't really. They'd sort of just been like, we don't want the riots getting out of control and attacking non-Jews. After Kristallnacht, the Jewish community of Germany was forced to pay a fine of 1 billion marks for von Raff's murder, which is equivalent to about $5.5 billion today. So, again, this is the Nazis trying to get everything they can out of Jews. Like, you saw that when we were looking at what they needed to immigrate. They're trying to pull all the money. They're trying to leave Jews leaving. They're trying to get it so the Jews who are leaving the country are leaving with next to nothing. Now they're trying to make it so that the Jews who are still in the country still don't have all that much. If you had a store and your store was destroyed in Kristallnacht, the insurance payment was sent to the government, not to you. So again, just kind of trying to bleed Jews for all the money they could get at this point. This led to a massive wave of immigration. So there was, in the 10 months after Kristallnacht, more than 115,000 Jews immigrated, but most of them went to other European countries. And if you can remember anything about World War II, you might remember that the Nazis took over pretty much all of Europe at one point. So while the immigration, might have delayed going to a concentration camp, in most cases it meant that you were, not going to survive still. And Kristallnacht, as I said, it made the Nazis' anti-Semitism and brutality super, super clear to the entire world. At this point, there were some calls for war, but they didn't really do anything. So there were a few countries that, seeing Kristallnacht, they went, oh, we should go to war against the Nazis because the Nazis are horrible. However, a lot of the reasons why it didn't go more is that people were still not happy with World War I. One of the most lingering effects that World War I had was it made countries very, very hesitant to start World War II. Because World War I had just been such a stupid war. So many people had died. It had completely destroyed the landscape of Europe itself. They're still pulling bombs out of the ground from World War I in Europe. So all of these countries basically were going, we don't like that Hitler dude, but we don't really want to fight him yet. Maybe if we just sort of, settle down. Yeah. Super clear to people willing to see it. Yeah, and even then, a lot of the pushback was more along the lines of, if they're willing to do this to their citizens, what will they do it to us? And as I kind of implied earlier, it marked a change in the way that the Nazis were being horrible to Jews. Before, Nazis had been focused on sort of repressing Jews through economic, political, and social means. After Kristallnacht, they start being more and more willing to use physical means. So beating, incarceration, murder. It's more physically dangerous to be Jewish in Germany after Kristallnacht. So Kristallnacht is it's important for multiple reasons. One of the reasons that I kind of talk about it here is because some people say that the Holocaust began before Kristallnacht. Some people say that it began with Kristallnacht, but pretty much everyone sees Kristallnacht as part of the Holocaust. So when you're talking about the Holocaust, it's a big thing that you're talking about. It has a lot of complicated moving parts that it's difficult to say when did it start, when did it end, because what dates you place depend on, do you include this as part of the Holocaust? Do you include that as part of the Holocaust? So Kristallnacht is sort of seen at the beginning of the Holocaust, and so it's how I use to lead into my overview of what the heck are we talking about. So Holocaust, the word itself, comes from the Greek word holocauston, which is a translation of the Hebrew word ola. I cannot say shola. I pronounce everything horribly. My pronunciation is horrible. Meaning a burnt sacrifice offered to God. It's also known as Shoah, which means catastrophe in Hebrew. And this is at its heart the sort of simple definition of the Holocaust. So this is, if you want to define the Holocaust in kind of a quick sentence. This is how sort of what you can get it down to. So the Holocaust was the systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. And usually for kids, when I'm teaching this, again, I teach this to high schoolers, and I was teaching it to freshmen most recently, I have to break that down. Because even if they look at this, a lot of times they don't know the meaning of some of the words. And then a lot of high schoolers, they'll just sort of go, meh, don't know the meaning of that. They won't go like, even just a Google of what does the word mean. So we break it down to what these words mean. So systematic, done or acting according to a fixed plan or system, methodical. It's not just willy-nilly. There is order to it. There's a plan to it. It is almost premeditated, definitely premeditated in some instances. Bureaucratic means that it's relating to the business of running a government. So it's something that is done methodically, done very purposefully by a government. It's done in a government way. State-sponsored, the government supports it. Nazis were behind the Holocaust. Nazis were the government. Persecution is hostility and ill treatment. So the Holocaust includes stuff that did not kill people. But it also includes, obviously, murder. And then collaborators, people who worked jointly. So it wasn't just the Nazis who did the Holocaust. There were many other people who contributed to it in various ways and for various reasons. The Holocaust was also a genocide, an intentional action to destroy a people. One part of why the Holocaust happened is that Nazis wanted to get rid of Jews. They wanted Jews to not be a thing anymore. Other groups as well, but predominantly Jewish individuals. There were, and we'll talk later on a little bit, and in the unit I talk about specifically, for example, the persecution of the Roma, persecution of LGBTQ individuals, even persecution of like Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff like that. Genocide coming from the Greek for race and people and the Latin for active killing. So it's literally killing a race or a people. A lot of by the way, the images I'm using for these slides, I always try to use images on my slides because it's something nice to look at that's not just staring blankly at me or the text, these are different Holocaust memorials. I believe this is in the one in Berlin, but I cannot remember off the top of my head. I think this one's really pretty. I wish I could remember where it was but again, Holocaust memorial. The Holocaust is only part of a larger event in which the Nazis and their collaborators murdered other groups. So again, Slavs, which means ethnic Poles, people from Poland, Soviet prisoners of war, Soviet citizens, Roma. I use the word Roma, and I will put in here for anyone who doesn't know. You may have heard the term gypsy. For example, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Esmeralda is a gypsy. The word gypsy is an insult. It's not quite the N-word, but it is not what that group of people prefer to be called. From my understanding, they prefer the term Roma. I prefer using the terms that are used, so Roma is what I will use for that. And there's still a lot of persecution against the Roma today in Europe and in America even. Also, the Nazis are targeting what they called the incurably sick. These are people with physical and or mental disabilities, people with stuff like epilepsy, inmates of mental asylums. I have a whole lesson later on in the unit where I talk specifically about, I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but the killing of these individuals. Political and religious dissenters, that include communists, because again, Nazis really didn't like communists. It also included religious groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses, among others. And of course, LGBTQ, most specifically, the Nazis most specifically targeted homosexual men. Other groups were definitely targeted as well, but the big one that gets brought up is homosexual men. Again, as I mentioned, you can put different boundaries for where you say the Holocaust started and where you say the Holocaust ended. The way that I choose to teach it is I say, when we're talking about the Holocaust, we're going to sort of agree in this class that when we say Holocaust, we mean that it lasted from 1933 to 1945. Again, historians disagree about what date to use at the start. I personally choose to go with January 20th, 1933, because it's the day Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. So one of the ways that I try and teach history is I try and teach history as it's not just something that's written down in the textbook. There's a bit of a discussion that can be involved with it. And part of what I say for that is that this is what I choose to go with for the purposes of this class, when I teach the class. We're going to do it that way. Others will define it more narrowly. One of the narrowest definitions of the Holocaust that I found is 1941 to 1945, which uses the date of the meeting where top Nazi officials decided to murder all the Jews of Europe. So during the time of the Holocaust, Germany is basically fighting two wars at once. They're fighting World War II, and they're fighting the racial war against Jews and other individuals, but predominantly when we're talking about the Holocaust, Jewish individuals. So Germany, from the start of World War II, is at something of a disadvantage because they are doing these massive operations at the same time. And it's interesting to look at, if you look into more advanced study of the Holocaust, it's interesting to look at the decisions that Germany made of when they were going to, expecting someone. I keep up to check when they're going to come or not. It's interesting to look at these decisions that Germany made of when they are going to put their resources toward World War II and when they're going to put their resources toward the war against the Jews that they're committing during the Holocaust. The element of the Holocaust that most people know off the top of their head, most people think about off the top of their head, are concentration camps. So Auschwitz, for example, is the one that everyone pretty much knows. Concentration camps were not originally designed as killing centers. The original purpose of concentration camps was just to keep people imprisoned. They were pretty much prisons. They're places to keep political opponents and other enemies of the state. So at first, they were not being used to their kind of full extent. You would have concentration camps where they would have people working, but most of their focus was a prison. It's kind of like, you could argue about this because of capitalism, but, modern day prisons will have, different manufacturing stuff attached to them, but theoretically at least, the primary purpose is supposed to be to keep people imprisoned. Similar thing going on here. But once World War II starts in 1942, forced labor in the camp becomes a vital part of the German war effort. Germany could not have fought the war that it fought without the use of this forced labor of prisoners, and a lot of them being Jewish individuals. Auschwitz had a very big manufacturing component to it. This, for example, is another forced labor camp, I'm forgetting the name, where it was a mining camp. When the war starts, the death rates in these concentration camps increase. Guards become even more brutal, and they start beating, starving, and even just straight up killing prisoners. The policy of these concentration camps became Vernichtung durch Arbeit, enjoy my horrible German, which was extermination through labor. So it's that they want to kill them by working them to death. The killing them just by straight up killing them with gas and other methods doesn't come until later. Inmates would be literally worked to death. In a lot of these prison concentration camps, the average lifespan was about 3 months. So you enter the camp, 3 months later, you're going to be dead from just sheer overwork. In 1941, the USSR is invaded by Germany, and German groups moved through German army groups moved through the USSR, carrying out mass murders of Jews, Roma, and Communist Party officials. Over 1 million Jewish individuals are killed at this point, along with hundreds of thousands of other groups. So again, Communist Party officials, Roma, etc. But this is where the Nazis realize they have a problem. The executions at this point, so the first executions of the Holocaust, purposely killing someone, not just working them to death, are, as you can see here, done by guns. And they're not trying to hide it. These are actual photos of these executions. He has a gun in his hand. This is a firing squad firing at people who are kneeling. This wasted bullets. So that's the Nazis' problem. They don't care about the fact that anything else. They care that it takes too many bullets and that it was too gruesome for the executioners. So they're not worried about the suffering of the people dying. They're worried about the dudes doing the killing. There's all these accounts from the time of various high-up Nazis going, yes, we will kill everyone who we need to, but are we going to be able, to have these soldiers be useful for anything afterwards? Thanks for stopping by Nerdo's Garbage. Hope you're not too bummed out. Go do something happy so you're not bummed out by this all day. There's accounts of, I think it was Joseph Goebbels who oversaw a murder, a mass murder, and said, we're just creating serial killers. So they're concerned that the guys who are killing all these Jews are going to go back to Germany and kill non-Jews. So they decide to try and find a more humane. The too many bullets, I just asked the Soviets for some, but one thing to sort of remember is that throughout World War II, the Nazis were severely limited in everything. Germany is not a really resource-heavy nation. Specifically one of the big ones is oil. Some of the later movements that Germany had against the USSR were them trying to get more oil. But yeah, they said it takes too long. It takes too long. If you're not ideally you could kill someone with one shot, but more likely you're not going to be able to do that. So on January 20th of 1942, the Wannsee Conference took place. Wannsee is it's the place where the conference took place at. It was a meeting of senior government officials, so high-up members of the Nazi Party. And the reason they're meeting is that they want to figure out the final solution to the Jewish question. So what they decide at this meeting, and we still have a fairly complete transcript. I know I've been to a few, for example, I think it's the Holocaust Museum down in LA, or it might be the Museum of Tolerance. There's two different museums that are very similar down there. One of those museums has a simulation where they play a recording of actors acting out some of this. So the solution they come up with, the answer to what is Germany going to do with Jews, is to deport most of them into into Poland. So get them out of Germany into Poland, which at this point is controlled by the Germans, and then murder them. The only Jews they plan on sparing are going to be those in forced labor, because remember that forced labor is vital to the way that the government functions at this point. And they said, we're going to have this forced labor. Most of the people in the forced labor are going to die. So the Jews who are being spared the final solution are not intended to live very long. They're intended to be useful and then die. And specifically, again, we have all these documents. This is one of the documents from that conference that specifically points out this is what we're going to do. The entire conference took 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Less than this live, maybe not less than the live stream, but not that long in the grand scheme of things to decide that you're going to kill millions of people. So here in red are the extermination camps. So something that comes up frequently when people learn a bit more about the Holocaust is that there was a difference between concentration camps and extermination camps. For example, it's a little hard to see, but all of these little dots here, those are all concentration camps. So Jewish individuals, other individuals were locked up. Again, concentration camp, kind of similar to a prison. It's only in the ones with this red circle that they're going to be killed. And you'll see that most of these are in Poland. A few are a bit farther afield. There's a reason for that. They're trying to hide it. They're not trying really hard, but they are trying to hide it. They're trying to hide what they're doing from other people, trying to make it a little less obvious, especially with their own population. You'll notice there's no extermination camp in Germany. This is a bit influenced by, before the actual Holocaust, Germany had been killing people with mental disabilities, physical disabilities, etc. And there had been an outcry from German individuals. So a lot of this is, they're putting them in Poland. Polish people are pretty much next on their list. The Nazis were only a fan of themselves. They did not like other nationalities. Their ideal world would have been either only them or them and other nationalities serving as their slaves. And there's various points of time where they are starting to expand over into Poland and put more, they're basically, kicking Polish people out and putting German people in. So the 6 extermination camps in Poland, Auschwitz, being specifically the most well-known, but I'm just going to put them up here. So Auschwitz to Birkenau, the reason it's called that is Auschwitz was a really big complex. It's like 3 or 4 camps in one, but we now know it, Auschwitz is how it's become known. Majdanek, Chemlau, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. So these are the extermination camps. All of them used gas to kill people who were brought there. Different methods of gassing were used in different camps at different times. Of course, the most famous being Zyklon B, which was used in Auschwitz, and a few others. But some of the earlier camps used diesel. So they would essentially, people commit suicide by, going in a garage and leaving the car running. Sort of similar method being used in some of the early camps. So Zyklon B is the most well-known. In all of these camps, victims were originally buried in mass graves. Some of those mass graves were later dug up and the bodies were burned in order to hide the murders. Some camps like Auschwitz had cremation facilities, but even at Auschwitz with the cremation facilities, there were times where they couldn't keep up with the amount of people being killed. This image on this slide is actually an American Army surveillance image. This was taken by a U.S. plane flying over Auschwitz, and I believe if you zoom in on, I think it's this section, you can't zoom in on this copy of the image, but zoom in on the original image, and you can actually see a line of people headed toward the gas chamber. Something that I always like to emphasize is that there's sort of a mentality sometimes of thinking that the people who died in the Holocaust just went calmly to their deaths, when that was not the case. There was resistance of all kinds. Later on in the unit, I do a whole focus on ways that people resisted the Nazis and fought back against their Nazis. There was resistance of large groups. There was even resistance of individuals. One of my favorite stories about Jewish resistance to the Holocaust comes from 1943. This is Francesca Mann. She was a Jewish ballerina, and in 1943 she arrived in Auschwitz along with other individuals. As part of the way that people were killed in Auschwitz, they were taken to an area, they were told they were going to take a shower to get rid of lice, and asked to take off their clothing, and then they're put into the gas chamber and killed. When she is told to take off her clothing, she stripped distractingly, stole a SS guard, so Nazi guard's pistol, and shot him dead. She managed to wound another guard in the stomach before she was killed. Other women took her attack as a signal to rebel. They were able to remove the scalp of one Nazi and tear the nose off of another. So there were all sorts of acts of resistance, some of them, violent last acts of, I'm taking you down with me, damn it. There's more passive acts. Most recently, I read about I guess it was like an island sort of in either the British Channel or sort of near the British Channel, where there was a person who was technically the feudal lord of that island who purposefully gave, the Nazis told her to give them milk so they could make butter, and she purposely gave them milk that you could not make butter out of. So all sorts of resistance to the Nazis. Unfortunately, there was also a lot of people who just went along with the Nazis. And the Holocaust was known about early on. Beginning of World War II, Nazis invade Poland. Polish government goes, and runs away. So the Polish government is in London as the Polish government in exile. And they're doing their best to try and organize rebellions, organize resistance against the Nazis. They learned about the extermination of the Jews of Europe, but the British and American governments were reluctant to publicize the information. So news of the Holocaust was very slow to get outside of Europe. One reason that they're worried about that is that at this point, they're trying to get Hungary to join their side. And England and America were worried that anti-Semitism in Hungary would make that country distrust the Allies. So there's also an element of there's several accounts of the United States government, which again was slow to get involved in the war, but when they eventually did, the U.S. government didn't want to turn World War II into a war about the Jews. Due to this, a lot of Jews in Europe didn't know about the extermination until it was too late. We sort of look back on it on stories of, truckloads or train loads of Jews arriving in Auschwitz and go, why did they think that they were going to be imprisoned? They didn't know. There were some rumors that got out, but some of these rumors were so horrific that no one would believe them, even if they later turned out to be true. Another big thing is that you have to realize, again, World War I had been just before this. A lot of people involved in the Holocaust had fought in World War I or knew people who had. And during World War I, there was this rumor about things called corpse factories. So it was a completely fake rumor that was spread saying that the Germans were using the bodies of their dead to make various objects. There's even some rumors of like cannibalism and stuff. Those had been proven wrong, but people had memories of those. And so if they heard a rumor about Auschwitz, about the Holocaust in general, they might go, oh, this is war. This is one side trying to make the other side look even worse. Yeah, that's also the sad thing, is that if World War II had been specifically about the Jews, it would have gotten less support. There's a reason, it is one of those, there was some book this is the weirdest tangent. I can dimly remember reading a book when I was in elementary school that was about like a boy who figured out that if he slept with a baseball card in his shoe, he could travel back in time. And he did so with his father to the Great Depression, and they saw Roosevelt at a baseball game, and his father wanted to tell him about Hitler. So yeah, it's one of those, as much as I enjoy, I like reading books and stuff that, do historical what-ifs, I'm really bad at them just because so many times I go, yeah, history's horrible. If they had known, it might not have caused anything. When this got started, though, again, Germany is fighting two wars at once. Shipping Jews to extermination camps had priority over almost everything. Even when the military situation was growing dire at the end of the war, even when Hitler's scrambling around basically fighting a war everyone knows is over, they would still place priority on shipping Jews to extermination camps. In fact, once it became clear that Germany was definitely going to lose, the pace of extermination picked up. Yeah, the same thing with Lincoln made the war about the slaves. Nowadays we look at Lincoln, we go, oh, he freed the slaves. There's the very famous, I think it's a letter where he says something along the line, Lincoln says something along the lines of, if I could end the war without freeing a slave, I would do it. If I could end the war with freeing all the slaves, I would do it. His focus was on trying to win the Civil War, not so much on slavery. So, for example, toward the end of the war, spring of 1944, Auschwitz was gassing, killing up to 6,000 Jews a day. And when the war came to an end, the Nazis tried to hide what they had done. Camps in Poland were closed down and disguised as other things as the USSR closed in. The remaining inmates were sent on death marches. They're marching them from place to place, trying to keep them away from the USSR, trying to kill them in the process. A massive amount of Jews died right at the end of the war, right before, salvation was on its way. Again, they're dismantling the camps. One of the reasons that Auschwitz is so well known is because they did not do a good job of destroying the camp. Basically they couldn't stop. The USSR moved too fast, and so they couldn't destroy everything like they did in I want to say Treblinka and Sobibor. I'm blanking on the specifics, but there are a few camps out there that don't exist nowadays. The Nazis basically bulldozed everything, and it's just a clearing in the forest with monuments that have been put up since then. On July 25th of 1944, Majdanek, one of the camps, was discovered by the USSR. This is the first camp that is discovered that had not been destroyed. So the USSR had moved too fast for them to destroy everything. So there's good evidence. On January 27th of 1945, Auschwitz itself was discovered. The USA eventually discovers its own concentration camp, Buchenwald, on April 11th, 1945. And on April 19th, 1945, the wider world learns about the Holocaust when the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, runs a report. So there's accounts of American soldiers just going, what the fuck? And there's a really good, I don't think I have it in those slides, but I'll usually play a clip from, I think it's the TV show Band of Brothers. I might be wrong on the TV show. There's an episode where it's basically inspired by this that is done really, really well. of just all of the soldiers going, what the heck is this? What the heck is, why, what is going on? So the wider world learns about the Holocaust, but the Holocaust is sort of slow to seep out. Yes. So so a lot of the concentration camps nowadays, a lot of the stuff is rebuilt, or in some cases it has been not rebuilt but modified because they're now museums or monuments. So you'll see sometimes in conspiracy theories, which I obviously do not believe any of the conspiracy theories about the Holocaust. I just find them fascinating from a look at the crazy person point of view. You will see a lot of stuff of people going, oh, this gas chamber has a wooden door. It didn't originally have a wooden door. It was partially destroyed either when the camps were being abandoned by the Nazis, or, Auschwitz, for example. For a long time afterwards, the local farmers would go to Auschwitz to basically take bricks for their houses. So there's stuff that, there's unfortunately a gold mine of stuff because they didn't really think at the start, we need to preserve this. But, this is one of the sort of more visual examples. One of the other reasons why a lot of sort of Holocaust, nowadays we think of it as it's part of history. How do people not know this? But you have to remember that pretty much as soon as World War II ended, the Cold War started. And when World War II ended, there was this scramble of picking up Nazi scientists, Nazi researchers, etc. So a lot of kind of the history of the Holocaust is swept under the rug in order to prepare for the Cold War. I don't think I've watched Denial. I might have. I know what I've watched. I think the title of the movie is Dr. Death. That it's about Fred Letcher, who's he wrote the Letcher Report, which is it's a pile of garbage, but it's a held up by the conspiracy theory guys. He was a guy. So again, I think it's called Dr. Death. I think it's Fred Letcher is his name. That he's an American who he apparently had gotten into the business of building execution machines for different states. And so one of those machines he said he built, there's some controversy over whether he built them or not. One of those machines is a gas chamber, and so some conspiracy nuts about the Holocaust asked him to investigate the gas chambers, and it's just horrible, and it'll make you so freaking angry, but it's a really well done documentary. So again, I think it's called Dr. Death. I'll have to look it up and post a link to it somewhere. So the Holocaust decimated Europe. Decimated European Jews. One of the things that also fuels conspiracy theories is the fact that we don't have an exact estimate. You'll see high estimates, low estimates. You'll see a variety of different numbers for the dead. A lot of this is just due to bad record keeping. Even nowadays, we don't have really good record keeping. So it's kind of unsurprisingly that, back then there'd be even worse record keeping. So you can see that there's a fair amount. Bulgaria, either 0 or 7,000, probably somewhere in the middle. So you'll see death ranges, from that range all over the place. And obviously that feeds into conspiracy theories because they go, hey, how do you know those people died? So this is an estimate of Jewish deaths. So the high and lows for different countries. An estimate, just for a general estimate of other groups, and some of it's unknown. So we don't know how many gay men. Other groups of LGBT were included in this, but we don't know how many died. One of the reasons for this is at the end of the war, it was a crime to be gay in a lot of the countries that were liberating the camps. So they would hide the fact that was why they were interred in the camps. What I usually do for this. Oh, yes, I have watched that. Yeah, Denial. The title wasn't ringing a bell, but yes, I have watched Denial. I love, I've read both Deborah Lipstadt and David Irving. So Deborah Lipstadt wrote a book for anyone who's watching who doesn't know, Deborah Lipstadt, an historian, she wrote a book about the Holocaust where she mentioned the fact that David Irving denies it. David Irving sued her in England because they have, the courts are kind of shitty when it comes to that. And she wrote another book about that. I've read both of those books, and I have seen both. Is Denial the documentary, or is it the the reenactment that has, like, isn't Deborah Lipstadt played by the person who played Bellatrix in Harry Potter? But I've seen both of them. So yes, I have seen Denial. It's just I didn't, the name did not spark a bell. Taking into account all the victims of Nazi persecution, the total death toll of the Holocaust is most likely over 17 million people. So massive, 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 massive death. And whenever I teach this, I try to end with, one of the things I do a lot when I teach is obviously, I try to connect the past to the present. I try to be like, here is why we are learning this. Yes, this is super depressing. Here is why we are learning it. So there's a really famous poem that you'll encounter. You'll encounter several different variations on it. I've seen different translations, but so this very famous poem. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This is a poem. You will find different variations of it with specifically, usually they plop in different, first they came for blanks, and you'll sometimes find the order a little different, but it's attributed to a gentleman, Pastor Martin Neilmore. And I think in general, like, I'm not a huge poetry person. I like it, but I'm not like a huge poetry person. I freaking love this poem. One of the reasons I really love this poem is because it continues to speak for people. So one example for how it speaks for people. So this is from a few years ago, the Trump Muslim ban protest at JFK Airport, I believe it is, in New York. So, people coming out to protest the ban. At any protest, one of the best parts for me is I love all the different signs. And one of the signs I saw when I was looking at footage of this was this one. First they came for the Muslims, and we said, not today, motherfucker. So I think one of the best things about learning history is looking at the past. And, it's very common to hear that whole saying of, like, the past informs the present. You can see elements of that. 2016. Okay, Rachel, I'm sure I've seen it. It's just my brain is horrible, so I'm probably blanking on, most movies that have come out within like the past 10 years or anything related to history I've seen. Very commonly I would see with my dad, for example. So 2016 was around the point that my parents had separated, and so I was living with my mother, and my father would take me to movies, and so we would usually see either the latest Avengers movie or the latest history movie because that was what I was into. So that is, and again, so when I teach this, in actual class, that's actually what I just did, is about sort of 3 lessons split together. So the anti-Semitism at the beginning, I usually, instead of just having the display of the documents that you need to leave and enter countries, I'll have like a little activity where students have to do it together. And then, so it's like 3 lessons kind of put together, and then that serves as the intro for the wider unit, where we go into more specifics of, excuse me, we go into more specifics of what, various elements of the Holocaust are. So we look more specifically at the death camps. We look more specifically at the side of the Holocaust, which is the killing of people with physical mental issues. It would be interesting to see a non-Dracula-focused Vlad the Impaler, because even the documentaries I've seen are all coming at it at a very Dracula point of view. But yeah, Vlad the Impaler is very interesting. Especially because, like, the reason we all know him, so Vlad the Impaler is, some people will cite him as the historical inspiration for Dracula. It is more likely that he was basically just name-grabbed as Dracula, because he's not really mentioned that much in, like, actual Dracula if you read it, which I haven't read it for a while, and the account of what he is in Dracula is very different from who he actually was in real life. So I know a little bit about it. What I think would make a really good movie either a more historical biopic or probably a really good horror movie would be Elizabeth Bathory, I think is how you pronounce the last name, who's sometimes called like the female Dracula. So this was a Romanian? I might be getting my Eastern European countries mixed up, but she was a noblewoman who was accused of bathing in the blood of her female servants in order to maintain her youthful appearance. And I've seen some interesting accounts that it was basically all made up in order to steal her land, but there's a whole bunch of, like historical accounts, and like she ended her life where they like basically walled her into a tower and, wouldn't let her see anybody else. So there's a lot of interesting people in history that should have a movie but don't have a movie. But yeah, so that is my Holocaust overview. One moment while I check something. As I said, I'm moving next. I am moving next weekend, so there's not going to be a Social Science Sunday next weekend because I'm going to be moving. I might do something during the week, or I might do something the week after. A lot of it depends upon what the heck happens there. And part of that moving is I'm trying to sell a few things so I don't have to move with it. So I've got a person who should be arriving any moment now to buy something off of me. So let's see here. What do I have to do? So what we could do right now. Yeah, that's understandable. Full disclosure, I was and still kind of am super into Vampire Chronicles. So Anne Rice, Interview with the Vampire, all that. I was crazy fanatically into it. I'm still into it, although I tried to read Prince Lestat, and it's the only time I've ever literally thrown a book away while screaming at it. I kind of almost wish that Anne Rice would not be writing Vampire Chronicles anymore because I don't like what she's done to the characters I like. So I'm really into Vampire Chronicles, so that got me into other vampires. Like, I actually got into Buffy through a Vampire Chronicles fanfiction. That I read a fanfiction where Vampire Chronicles crossed over with Buffy, and I didn't know what the fuck Buffy was. And I watched Buffy. I have a very weird intro to a lot of things. I think what I'm going to do right now is if I can get my computer to cooperate with me. I started reading Hellsing, but for some reason I couldn't get into it. I don't remember specifically why. Like, I thought it was kind of cool, but I just couldn't ever really get into it all that much. So I think what I'm going to talk about this for a while, and maybe we'll talk about something else. If anyone wants to ask a question in chat, that'd be awesome. What I'm going to do... Where is... There we go. Yeah, I mean, I like Buffy more. If I'm really being honest, I like Buffy more for the, like, as a vehicle for fanfiction. There's several shows where I like the show, but I kind of like the fanfiction more. That I like that, people will take it and do cool things. So I was more into Angel, the series, than I ever was into Buffy. I still think I haven't watched all of Buffy. I think I've skipped a few episodes here and there. So what I kind of wanted to briefly talk about, because I think it's kind of interesting to note, is the history social science standards in California. So, again, I'm a California high school history teacher. In California, if you want to teach in a public school, you need to get what is called a credential. The kind of credential, there are two basic kinds. There's multiple subject credential and single subject. Multiple subject is pretty much elementary. If you want to teach kindergarten or if you want to teach 5th grade, you get the same credential, which is a multiple subject credential because you're teaching multiple subjects. You're going to teach math, you're going to teach history, you're going to teach English. If you want to teach mostly high school but also some middle school, you get the single subject. And that is specifically history, math, etc. You can get multiple and you can teach outside of your credential on some occasions, but pretty much you want to teach history in a high school, you get a history credential. It's kind of annoying to get. Pretty much the basic entry requirements are you have to have a BA, so your usual Bachelor of History usually. You can have a BA in other subjects, but it helps to have a BA in whatever subject you want to teach. So you go through a 4-year college to get your BA, or go through another way to get your BA. Then you have to enter a teacher credential program. So different colleges will run these. Some of them have it built into the BA that you can do it as like a minor, basically. I didn't go that way. I went just credential. For the credential process, you have to take several classes that are about how to teach, educational theory, etc., etc. And then you have to do student teaching. Student teaching is the worst damn part of becoming a teacher. Because when you do student teaching, you are in a classroom teaching the students, but you don't get paid. So my credential program that I went through did 2 placements of like 3 months. So for 6 months, I was basically a full-time teacher, but I didn't get paid, and I had to pay them because I'm taking classes additionally. So becoming a teacher is really, really hard if you don't have a support system in place. I was lucky enough that my family was able to, lend me money and let me live with them and stuff like that. Then you actually go into teaching. But when you're teaching, one of the things that guides what you teach are what are called the California History Social Science Standards. This is very obviously not the official document for them because it would look a lot more boring. What this is this is the History Scribe, which is a Tumblr that I run. I will drop the link in chat. The History Scribe is a Tumblr that I run that I use as basically a big filing system for myself. And it's got a whole bunch of history images and stuff. So pretty much the California History Social Science Standards or Social Studies Standards, you'll find standards for every subject, and it says what you have to teach. So for example, if we scroll down, because these are a little breakdown of the numbers. The first number indicates the grade level, and the second number is just, this is the 6th one. So if we go down past 8th grade, according to the state of California, in 10th grade, some places will do this in 9th grade. The place I taught it most recently did. In 10th grade, students are taking world history, culture, and geography, the modern world. And this breaks down what you have to teach them. So it'll say, you need to be able to. Students relate the moral and ethnic principles in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy in Judaism and in Christianity. Yes, Tumblr still exists. The Not Safe for Work purge ban killed it off, but I'm basically hanging out on Tumblr until they kill it, mostly because Tumblrs feel it fairly easy to work. I figured out how to work it, so I use it for my own purposes. Whenever Tumblr eventually dies, getting this thing off of it's going to be a problem. So basically what this means is that in order to be satisfying the state of California, you need to be able to at least sort of go, oh, look, I'm teaching this. So you need to be able to point to various things. So I keep this, for example, if we look up, there we go. So, for example, the bit that requires teachers to teach about the Holocaust is 10.8.5. Analyze the Nazi policy of pursuing racial purity, the Holocaust, basically. There's other ones that cover it as well. So the way that I use this is I use this as being able to index images and stuff I found. So, and I'll find an image that I think, oh, that'd be cool to show or maybe use at some point. So this is, for example, Albert Einstein, his secretary, and his daughter becoming U.S. citizens to avoid returning to Nazi Germany. And I'll tag it with the various things. So that way, if I'm making lessons, I can find it. So the reason I bring this up is because not just in history, but in more science classes, this is very important. Because if I'm teaching and I don't cover one of these, I could theoretically, in reality not so much, but I could theoretically get in trouble for not covering this. And there's a whole bunch of it. Again, it's split up that I put all these grades, but it's a whole bunch of stuff that's included in what you need to teach. Now, thankfully, because California is a pretty big state, most textbook companies have a California version of their textbook. So that helps you out. So it's more just adding to it. However, there are certain things. For example, California has a great thing. California has a thing called the Fair Education Act. The Fair Education Act requires that California schools provide fair, accurate, inclusive, and respectful representations of people with disabilities and people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender in history and social studies curriculum. This is huge. I don't think many other states have it. Basically, this is saying you have to cover LGBTQ and disability issues, and you have to do it in a respectful manner. Other states don't have that. Other states will actually have stuff against it. So these are always really interesting to look up. If you ever have a question of like, why is the education on this point so bad, I can almost guarantee you that if you go to the standards, it's a problem. Does history have the same issue of teaching? I'm going to switch over my chatting view one moment. Does history have the same issue of teaching to the test that science and math does? Somewhat. It's a little bit less. Okay, so preface this by, in my experience in California at the kind of schools I've taught at, not so much. The reason for that is that there's not as much of tests. So, for example, I am blanking on the name of it, but there's some big test that all high schoolers in California have to take. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a big like state test basically. That test is basically math and English. Science factors in a little bit, but it's mostly math and English. There isn't a big history test that we have to teach to. So for some cases, no, because we don't have a specific test we need to teach to. You will get individually issues of teaching to the test, but not so much. More what I've encountered is a lack of focus. So, for example, the first school that I'll talk about this in a second. The first school that I taught at was south of Oakland, but similar kind of, urban environment, very high rate, a lot of African American students in the school, very disadvantaged population. The history teachers would get told, oh, by the way, on the 15th, you need to take your class to go get pictures taken during your class. So basically, we were asked to give up our classes instead of making like the English teachers do it, or instead of making the math teachers do it. SAT, not so much. The approach that I've seen schools take to the SAT is more of an add-on. So California has, I don't know if it's a requirement or just like a thing that everyone does where they take the SAT junior and senior year. So, and that was a case where the school, I've taught in two schools. The second school I taught at did not do this because of COVID, but the first school, they had a day where just juniors and seniors didn't have school. They all went to various rooms and took the SAT. And the SAT is not so much content as it is reading ability, is putting it simply and probably wrong in a way. So there's not really an element of teaching to the test. You get that more in the math and science classes and in English classes. History, we have the benefit of being forgotten. So a lot of the times, like big educational focus, like, oh, the new thing is, insert buzzword here, will get applied to math and science and English before it gets applied to history. And usually by the time it gets applied to history, we've moved on to the next big buzzword. So when teaching to the test becomes a thing in history, is more an individual teacher doing it, which is something that you need to sort of watch out for. I've been lucky in that the schools I've taught at haven't been focused that much on grades. I mean, they're focused on grades, but they're not like wanting you to have a certain pass rate or anything like that. So I've been lucky in that of the two schools I taught at, the school south of Oakland sadly just didn't care. As long as you weren't failing like everyone in your class, they really didn't care about the grades. And they'd like look at you, they'd observe you and stuff, but they didn't really care that much. The school I taught at more recently, which is near Salinas, California, was more focused on the well-being of the students. So they would focus, and it was a smaller school, so they could focus more on individual level. But no, you don't really get teaching to the test because the majority of the tests are science, they're math, they're you know, they're not testing history, which is a good thing for teachers because we don't have to be like, oh God, we have to do this because they've said. But more what you'll get for history is they will try to sort of cram history in with English. So, for example, there is a Common Core, which honestly I don't know that much about just because history gets forgotten by it. But Common Core is kind of this effort to standardize requirements across the nation, which has been met with some very big pushback, specifically in the area of science, usually connected to evolution. But Common Core there is not a Common Core for history, really. Common Core for history is they took the English Common Core and then did a Control F and put history in instead. So there's some movement on that, but it's not so much. In most schools, you get science and math being the big focus, and then English getting more focus than history. History in many schools is kind of a step above like the arts. So, we don't get canned like the arts do because we're a requirement. But, for example, a sort of good example of how I feel that shows how history is not valued as much is the standards themselves. The California history standards don't have a standard for ninth grade. So ninth grade being your first year of high school. The reason the California history standards have 10th grade, 11th grade, and senior year, so 12th grade. So of the 4 years in high school, they have one. I'm sorry, guys. I will be back in a few. I need to bop out and get something. So I'm going to put this up. I apologize. I will be back in a moment, okay? So hang on. If you put your questions in the chat, I'll check them out and I'll answer them when I come back. But back in a few. Hey, are you driving to the gate right now? Okay. So, do you want to take a bit like on the hard minutes or like minutes and stuff? So, sorry, apartment complex is a little weird, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm not in the excited. So did you turn into like the complex that was right on the street, or did you turn into like the road that kept a little bit? Okay, so what you want to do is you go out of that complex. Actually, this is the apartment complex lot smaller than so if you go back and continue going on the street to the right and go out. You want to take that, and it's basically going to go kind of almost like a U-turn that's going to bring you back for the gate you saw with all the cars in front of it. So you'll take a left past like the mailboxes and drive down that, and I will come out the other way to wave at you to guide you in. Yes, so I'm like all the way back there. So I'll come out and I'll wave you in and get y'all loaded up. Whew. There we go. Thank you for that. So about 2 years back, my mom got me this like treadmill for my cat. My cat has never used it. I'm moving next week, so I was selling it. So that was the person that had bought it. So now I have Chinese food money. That's what I always have called extra money to use. So let us see here. Thank you for everybody who stuck around as just randomly running around being like, it's a little always amusing because so yeah, I've met this one on Craigslist. Shows up to come get it, you know, she's putting in her car and she's like, oh, I'm so glad that God led me to you. And I'm like, yeah. So, let's see here as I check that everything did not combust as I went away. So we had our Holocaust lesson. As I've got that voting thing, I do have other lessons that we can do if people are into it. If not, because I know that was like a larger lesson than we did last time, we could, I don't know. Anyone got any questions? Anyone got any what should we do? Can do something non-history related technically if someone's like, hey, do that. As I swelter. Did I manage to answer your question, Hinson, about the testing? To sort of make sense for history is a very interesting subject when it comes to the politics of a school. Because with regards to school politics, in general, again, there's always going to be exceptions, but with regards to school politics, the focus is primarily upon math, science, and then kind of English as a runner-up. And when there's focus on other subjects, it tends to be like, oh, why aren't we funding this? And you get that more with art, with prep, stuff like that. So yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, admittedly, again, I haven't been at that many schools. As I say, I've got something in my eye. Oh, so much smog in the air. Even though I only went out for a little bit, I feel like there's a layer of soot on my skin. It's always interesting to look at the politics of different schools and stuff like that. And just one of the biggest things with public schools is the extent to which non-education people factor in. The best example that I can think of for that is the first school that I taught at, the school south of Oakland. When I was teaching there, they were preparing to pick a textbook. They already had a textbook, but most public schools, every so many years, they will go, should we get a new one? Because, you know, textbooks change, even history textbooks change. And so the history department was preparing to get a new textbook. And they involved the teachers in this. And one part of it was we basically split into groups. So there was a world history group, there was a U.S. history group, there was an American government group, etc. I was in the world history group, so I was looking at the various world history textbooks. So first thing we did, we basically went to all these textbook companies and went, hey, we're this district, this is how many students we have, we want to get a new textbook, can you send us some stuff? And different textbook companies would send different amounts. So like some textbook companies, they'll send you like a whole class set for you to try out, some will only send you one, some will send you like nothing at all. So you get all these textbooks, usually you do a first round look and you'll eliminate some. You'll either say, oh, this textbook sucks. You'll say, hey, this is the textbook we already have and they haven't changed that much. Or you'll say, a lot of times you'll say, this is going to be too expensive. And what we decided to do was we were going to go to the students with some of those textbooks. So we did this basically activity where we asked the students to compare different textbooks and give us their feedback. We do the same thing with members of the community, parents, etc. However, the thing that stuck out in my mind from that process was we're having a staff meeting for the history teachers there was this teachers from the school I was at, and there were several other high schools in the area, in the district, because it was a bigger district. So several high schools all in the same district. And we're sitting down and we're talking about what we like about the textbooks, what we don't like. And amongst the teachers, there is also I don't remember what she was specifically, but she was some kind of district person. So some kind of worked for the district, not a teacher, worked in an office or something. And she wanted to be involved in this. So she was talking about it. And all of a sudden she says, well, do we really need to buy a textbook? Because they're not really using textbooks in college, are they? And cue just every single teacher in that room going, what are you talking about, woman? So unfortunately, we eventually chose a textbook. We didn't just not have a textbook. But partially because there's a California law about textbooks and stuff. But anyway, but it is one of those moments where you go the people in charge are not knowing what the heck they're talking about. There's very often a disconnect between the people who are actually teaching and the people who are sometimes even just the person running the school. While a lot of principals are teachers or were teachers, it's by no means all of them. There are principals who have never been teachers, etc. There are principals who have not been teachers in too long. There's a whole bunch of insane stuff out there that it's what the heck in heck. So, I didn't have many textbooks in college, as in a traditional textbook, because I was going to, history and I was going to a smaller liberal arts college. A lot of the books I had to have for class were, more they weren't mass market paperbacks, but they were more I held this up on stream the other day. They're more like this, where it was not a textbook, but a book about a specific topic. And when I did have something approaching textbooks, my college, they mostly did, they would do packets of stuff, individual readings. So they didn't really do, again, because I'm going through, I don't know what subject you were studying in college, but I was studying, history and religion. So a lot of it was, we want you to read, I had to get the Bible was one of my texts, for a couple of my religious classes, had the Bible, had stuff like that. But just the sheer, just someone sitting down and saying, oh, they're not using textbooks in college I'm really glad I'm not teaching at that district anymore. I wish I was still teaching at the San Laurent, the south of Oakland was the one I taught at, 2018, 2019. 2019, 2020, I was teaching at one near Salinas, and it was a much smaller district. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And I loved that school. I wish I could still teach at that school, but basically because it was a smaller school, they were in a position where the district ran the numbers and said you need 2.5 history teachers and 2.5 English teachers. So instead of having 3 history teachers and 3 English teachers, we want you to have 2 English teachers, 2 history teachers, and 1 teacher who can teach both. And since I don't have a credential for English, they decided to go with someone who had, I'm assuming, English and history credential. But I loved the last school I was teaching. I was so great. I miss the kids. I miss them. They were so sweet. What say you, Hitson, who is the only person in chat? You want another lesson? You want to just chat? What do you want to do? I'm up for kind of whatever. I have nothing better to do. I have to drive up. I'm driving about 3 hours north tomorrow to go to an interview. Ooh, okay. Favorite mythology, folklore, who's my favorite hero of legend? So, I actually don't know enough. I don't know as much about folklore and mythology as I wish I did. A lot of what I know is kind of half remembered stuff from ancient Greece and Rome, and stuff that kind of learned a little bit about. My high school, there's this one English teacher that was like the best English teacher ever. Like I still like I'm not religious, and I would want this guy to be a saint. He did a trip to Greece every summer, and for juniors and seniors, and so I went on that trip, and it was amazing, and it was beautiful, and I wish I was back there. But so a lot of my sort of knowledge of mythology is more Greek and Roman and kind of half remembered. So I don't know if I necessarily have a favorite hero of legend. I always thought Athena was a really cool goddess. That's not really the same thing. Like I just thought Athena was my jam. I still kind of have on like one of my like to maybe purchase one day list like a statue of Athena because I think Athena was cool. So yeah, I don't really have a favorite. I like I guess I get really into, for me, kind of instead of like actual mythology, the thing I get really into is I don't know how to put this. I get really, I think the reason I think so, like, I think the reason that I really like to write fan fiction and read fan fiction is that element, if that makes any sense. That I kind of almost like, I've read a few accounts about how, people arguing that like Arthurian legend, so, Arthur and the Round Table and all, is a kind of proto fan fiction of people taking this established mythology, established canon, and then building off of it. Because, like, there's so many, in Arthurian legend, there's all these stories where it's basically they took their local area and said, oh, this is Sir whatever his name is, he's from this area and he's amazing. So I kind of think that what I, instead of like necessarily liking like actual mythology slash folklore, I tend to like that element of it in fandom. So I like kind of the, there's the canon, and then there's what people basically have said. Like I think the good example of this is like Avengers fan fiction. After the Avengers movie came out, like this whole just kind of stuff emerged that like everyone accepted the fact. Like everyone went like, oh yeah, Clint travels through the vents. All this various, there's like all these things that people just kind of latched onto. Yeah, Lancelot was very much some French dude, self-insert Mary Sue. I don't know much about Arthurian legend, but I know enough about that. So I kind of tend to take more of a, I like elements. And like a good example of this is one of my current, so I go through, hyperfixations of various things. Some of which are like, history is my hyperfixation that I just turned into my hobby, my livelihood, so I can have that. But, I go through moments where I'm, like, more focused on this fandom, more focused on that fandom. So, like, I really like kind of the parts in fandom where people look at the source and pull these little things out and say, this shows me that. One kind of more mainstream example of that is like Harry Potter, F. J.K. Rowling, get out of here. I definitely the author for Harry Potter. But, for example, people taking, like, looking very in depth at a character and going, hey, this seems to indicate this. So for me, like, for example, I will always tend to prefer fan fiction, which there is at the very least a hint or indication of, like, when I reread Harry Potter, and I read the stuff with the Dursleys, I go, holy shit, that's an abusive family. So I enjoy that element of fandom, of the element of picking out these little bits and sort of like unraveling them or creating connections. So one of my current hyperfixations has been, I don't know if it has necessarily an actual established name. The Markiplier egos. So, Markiplier, famous YouTuber, that he's made these, Markiplier's made a few different, like, story videos. So most recently he made Heist with Markiplier, which is like this choose your own adventure. But as part of his videos, he plays different characters. And he plays different characters, and I really love some of them. Like, for example, one of the videos is Wilford Motherlovin Warstash, which Jesus Christ, Mark is a really good actor in that, in my opinion. So I like pulling the little threads out of that and, like, implying stuff from that. Nonsense shipping. I can sometimes get behind really weird ships if the author makes it work. In general, almost every fan fiction, I don't ship women in fandom. Like, I ship some fairly ridiculous stuff, but I ship it in stories that make it work. And I tend to ship gay pairings. There's all that can be said about that. I think some of that might be due to the fact that, obviously this is not going to apply so much to Harry Potter, but kind of in general, the fact that a lot of content creators are male, I think tends toward male characters being more three-dimensional than female characters. So, all of my favorite characters in pretty much every media I consume are men. So I tend to, ship those more commonly. But I've shipped my fair amount of ridiculous stuff. It's not so much guilty pleasure, but it's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, is I really like Harry Potter fan fiction where they lean heavily on the Dumbledore as a manipulative bastard. So I really like Harry Potter fan fiction where the light side isn't, like, actually the good guys. I don't really like Hermione. Like, I'm not anti-Hermione, but I'm not really I don't really share. So, like, I'm mostly, like, I'll sometimes like Harry Snape. Because I like the sort of rewrites where they lean heavily onto the Dumbledore's manipulative light side isn't actually light. I actually read a fair amount of Harry / Voldemort, but again, it's all in kind of the written universes where it's, again, I said, it's going against, it's kind of making it more in depth than stuff. And I've read a few, but yeah, I don't really. Pretty much every fandom I'm into, the female characters, I can like them. They're just not my favorite. And I usually will, if I read something, they'll be shipped as, like, a background ship. Yeah, I sort of prefer Fleur. Hermione, I think the reason I don't really read as much with Hermione is because a lot of those fics that I tend to enjoy, in addition to the Dumbledore's actually, like, manipulative bastard thing, they will have, like, stuff about the Weasleys being plants. So, like, I can remember, like, reading Harry Potter for the first time and being like, why the heck are the Weasleys this, family entirely of wizards, like, loudly proclaiming, where the platform is and stuff like that. So I kind of, in my fan fiction, I tend to like stuff that takes that and puts a little bit of that. Yeah, like, you're going with, so for Harry Potter, I kind of bailed on the actual books around book 5, definitely by book 6. So book 5 I actually read the night it came out. So my parents had ordered it via Amazon. We read, like, the first chapter, while we were going out for dinner, while we waited for a table. We read the first chapter, and then I stayed up all night reading the whole thing. And I was really not impressed with book 5. Book 6 I read a little bit after it came out, because I was on, like, an exchange program in France. And so really, for me, if I'm wanting Harry Potter, I go to fan fiction, and most of the fan fiction, is stuff that sort of is of a similar mindset, where they didn't really like book 5. The thing that super pissed me off about book 5 was, and again, I think I read it once and maybe reread it, like, a few years later. The thing that really pissed me off about it was the mirror that Sirius gives Harry, and it just didn't seem to pay off. And there was just all these points in book 5 where I was like, that it just struck me as, like, setting up stuff and then not paying off. So as I said, like, I think because I think that fed into it. So yeah. So Yay, money. Paid the person with Venmo and she hit the request button. So yeah, definitely Snape as presented in the actual canon is not someone you want to look up to. As I said, like, a lot of the times when I'm reading stuff, it'll be stuff that kind of rewrites it. That, you know, I don't know. It's one of those I just feel like as the years have gone by, J.K. Rowling has, like, done everything she can to just, like, destroy her series. I mean, like, so full disclosure, let's see, okay, so I've read all the Harry Potter books, I've seen all of the movies, I have not seen the Fantastic Beasts, and I'm, even at the height of my interest in Harry Potter, I was more into the fandom than I was into the fan fiction than I was into anything else, so, but, yeah. So yeah, so I guess you know, modern stuff is fandom mythology. I don't know if that makes any sense. A lot of times I'm like, am I just rambling and not making sense and trying to drink out of a glass that's empty? But yeah, there's definitely some stuff out there that's pretty messed up. But I tend to, when I'm looking, so again, like, a lot of the stuff I go for fanfiction for is stuff that it's, in my mind, either fixing stuff that I don't like or addressing, like, sort of threads that were left dangling. I tend to also, I guess, just especially with Harry Potter fanfiction, I tend to see everybody in the worst light. Like, I think that's why I really like, really like the, you know, again, sort of the stuff that fits into the category of you know, we've been fed, you know, the propaganda piece sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. Computer, why? So, I really like that trope in fanfiction, the Harry Potter raised by others, the others trope. I really like that one. I even like crappy ones. Like, I don't know. Like, I can like appreciate. I can appreciate fan fiction on many different levels. You know, that I've got. You know, there's you know, fan fictions out there where I'm like, I really, you know, that are just completely like story driven, people doing really cool things with the world. So, for example, I'm gonna have to look up the title of this fic. It's so good. I love it. So there is a Full Metal Alchemist fic called Reverti a Predatoria. I cannot. It's Latin. I'm gonna post it in just a second. I'll post it in the chat if I can. So there's this really good. It's a Full Metal Alchemist. I can't remember if it's based on Brotherhood or if it's based on the other one. I think it's kind of based on a mix. I just posted in the chat the name of it. It's on Archive of Our Own, I'm pretty sure. This is an amazing, amazing Full Metal Alchemist fanfiction. Basically, the plot of it is post Full Metal Alchemist. Ed is helping chase down a rogue alchemist who is doing time travel alchemy, and Ed gets sent back in time. So it's like he gets sent back in time into his own body. So he gets sent back in time to write as the brothers are trying to bring back their mom. But he has all the stuff he knows already. So he basically gets a do-over, and it's so freaking cool. There is a ship. It is Ed versus Roy, but it's not like super. Like, I don't even think there's any sex scenes or anything, but I highly recommend that. It's really good fan fiction. I'm not Hasmid. I don't know. The name rings a bell, but I have so much. So I got into fan fiction. My gateway drug into fan fiction was Vampire Chronicles. And as you might know, Anne Rice, the author of the Vampire Chronicles. The Vampire Chronicles is a series. It includes Interview with the Vampire, Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, other books like that. The collective work is known as Vampire Chronicles. It's written by Anne Rice. Anne Rice is one of those names that stands out as the reason why that she would sue people who wrote fanfiction. So I got into fanfiction through Vampire Chronicles fanfiction. Vampire Chronicles fanfiction had to be very careful not to get sued by Anne Rice. As a result of that, it was very common in Vampire Chronicles that you could be reading a fic and then it would just vanish off the face of the world. So because of that, my entry into fanfiction set me up with this mentality of if I like this fic, I need to save it somewhere or I'm never going to find it again. So I have a whole external hard drive. It wasn't originally for fic, it was for other stuff. My external hard drive has this giant folder that is just fanfiction. So that I just keep. If I like a fanfic, I put the fanfic in there and I keep it in there. So it, works for me because it's like, oh, hey, if my internet goes down, then I can just do, stuff off of that. But, so I don't know, what's Quatermass? I've read so much fanfic, I can't recall the names and stuff. So I, maintain that, and then I think most people who get into fanfic at least try writing their own fanfic. I currently, the big thing that some people might be watching this chat note from is I currently am writing a series called Silicet. Silicet is Latin for that is to say, mostly because I'm really bad at titles, so it was kind of nice to just use a bunch of Latin phrases for all of my titles that I have. So that is my giant fanfic that I'm writing currently. Silicet is currently 59 or 58 chapters long. Way too many words for me to remember off the top of my head. And I'm currently in the process of I am editing it. So I've been writing it for a long while, and then I decided that I needed to go through and I needed to edit it, mostly so I could reread it, so I could remember what the heck I'm doing with my life, with my fanfic. Silicet is a DC Comics, mostly Batman fanfic, where so there's the grandiose summary is there's an infinite number of parallel Earths. For every decision we make, somewhere there is an Earth where we've already made the opposite choice, but it is not our decisions which are affected by this, all the decisions made by nature. Here's a world where you're poor, one where you're rich, one where no fish was brave enough to crawl up on land, one where the world ended in nuclear war. Here's a world where Thomas and Martha Wayne didn't die, here's one where Bruce Wayne died with them, and here's a parallel Earth where Thomas and Martha Wayne died, but Rachel Wayne survived. So it's a DC fanfic, which is a partial gender bent. So not every character is the opposite gender as they are in canon, but a fair number are. So Batman is Batwoman. Stuff like that. It's kind of a combination of most heavily inspired by the Batman Begins, Dark Knight movies, but also heavily inspired by Batman the Animated Series and the Justice League Animated Series. It's massive fic that's eating up my life. It's on Archive. I'm on Archive of Our Own under the same username, just with one underscore between the Captain and Rachel. That's the one that I'm currently writing. Apparently some people think it's good. I try to make Batwoman in this have faults, but I've definitely been accused of Mary suing Batwoman, even though I try to make Batman. Part of writing Batman fics is making it that Batman just fails at human relations and stuff. So that's the big thing that I'm very slowly editing. I'm not on FF.net. I'm on Archive of Our Own. I was originally on another website. I've never been on FF.net. I highly recommend Archive of Our Own. I feel like this... I will sometimes go to fanfiction.net in order to... There's certain fanfic that I've read there that I really like. But Archive of Our Own, the thing for me that really sells Archive of Our Own has the best sorting. Searching on Archive of Our Own is so amazing. The tagging system on Archive of Our Own is glorious, and I love it. the thing that annoys me about fanfiction.net is that it's really hard to find. Like if I'm in the mood for something, I can find it on archive. I can't sort stuff on FF.net. So Archive Our Own, really like them. They don't do ads, which is also the really good thing. So they have a little bit more wiggle room. Archive Our Own will go to bat to like they're really. I love Archive Our Own. If I had money, if ever I reach the point where I'm employed and not paying off a mountain of student loan debts, I would donate a whole bunch of money to Archive of Our Own. It's just such a great fanfiction website and resource, and they're really invested in not just fanfiction, but in the sort of history of fandom. So I'm not on FFnet. I've never had an account on FFnet. I just post everything on Archive. I love Archive, so yeah. So currently writing I have other fics on Archive that are technically in progress, but I don't think I'll keep working on them. The two that I am actually working on is Silset, so the DC fandom, and then I'm also working on, as I said, I'm really into Markiplier Egos, so I'm writing a Markiplier Ego fanfiction that I wrote like a one-shot, and I'm in the process of trying to turn that into a larger series. I'll use fanfiction.net, but not that frequently. I don't have a specific reason why. Just kind of don't. Yeah. Yeah. So I think at this point I'm going to sign off in a moment. I'll see if I can find someone to raid or something like that in a second. As I sort of mentioned earlier in the stream, I'm going to be moving next week. So, I haven't even heard Peltaker. I'm going to be moving next week, so I'm not going to be able to stream next Sunday. So currently, I might stream next week at some point. I'm sort of figuring that out. Or I might stream the week after. But so currently, my plan is that there will be a Social Science Sunday on the 6th, which is the Sunday after next. I might try and do some other kind of stream at some point just to expand my viewing. And at that point, I will have a different background because I'm moving. So, let's see. Is there someone that I can raid? Really be a Twitch streamer. Ah, my computer, it's so slow. Puzzle game, maybe I do want to see. I mean, there are weirder things that have fandoms out there. I mean, you know, there's weirder things that have I can't think of a good example right now because my brain's overtired and just, you know, is like, hey, just get some food already. But there's definitely weirder things out there that people have done. It's in. Who do you think we should raid? Do you know anyone we should raid? Of course the Bible is a fanfiction page. Everything has a fanfiction page. Archive of Our Own, like, there was a point on Archive of Our Own where I was the big name in Hannibal fanfiction because it was before the Hannibal show came out. So it was Hannibal book fanfiction. I think the Serfs are doing a charity stream. So I say we're just going to do a very teeny little raid on the Serfs. So thank you guys. I had a lot of fun. I'm enjoying this even though they're small. Again, no Social Science Sunday. No Social Science Sunday until like not next week but the week after. I'll post updates where I usually post updates.